At 8:17 p.m. on a rain-soaked Friday in October, Lena Marlowe, CEO of Marlowe Manufacturing, a woman who commanded boardrooms like battlefields and never apologized for her ambition, stood trembling on Ryan Cole's doorstep. Her tailored coat was drenched, mascara streaked her pale cheeks. 3 days ago, he'd quit, walked away from the company, from her, from everything they'd built in silence. She'd accepted his resignation with clinical professionalism, but now, clutching a manila envelope like a lifeline, she looked him in the eye and whispered 6 words that shattered everything. "I accepted you quitting, not losing you." Ryan Cole, who'd spent 3 years loving her in secret, felt the world tilt sideways. If you want to know how a woman who never loses control ends up broken in the rain, and how the man who walked away might be the only one who can save her, stay with me. This is a story about what happens when the price of success becomes too high to pay, and the only way forward is to risk everything you've spent years protecting. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels, and let's begin. The resignation letter sat on Lena Marlowe's desk like a grenade with the pin pulled. She'd read it 4 times. Each pass made the words worse. Effective immediately. Personal reasons. Grateful for the opportunity. The corporate pleasantries couldn't hide what screamed between the lines. Ryan Cole was running, and she was the reason why. Lena pressed her fingertips against her temples, a gesture her executive coach would have recognized as distress masked as focus. Outside her corner office, the manufacturing floor hummed with third-shift activity. Machines stamping steel, forklifts beeping, the organized chaos of a company that never slept. Marlowe Manufacturing had grown from her grandfather's machine shop into a $400 million enterprise under her leadership. She'd sacrificed relationships, sleep, and softness to build this empire. And now the one person who'd ever seen past the armor was leaving. "Ms. Marlowe," her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 7 p.m. with legal is waiting." Lena didn't answer. She was staring at Ryan's signature, that confident scrawl she'd seen on project reports and budget proposals for 3 years. The handwriting was the same. Everything else had changed. 3 days ago, he'd walked into this office at 6:53 a.m. She remembered the exact time because she'd been surprised to see anyone else in the building that early. He'd been holding 2 coffees, the cheap stuff from the break room, not the espresso from her private machine. His face had looked carved from exhaustion. "I need to resign," he'd said, no preamble, no build-up. "I have a letter." She'd taken it, read it while he stood there watching, and felt something crack in her chest that had nothing to do with business. "Ryan, I can work the 2 weeks if you need transition time," he'd interrupted, professional to the end, "but I'd prefer to leave today. Is this about the merger?" She'd kept her voice level, CEO mode, even as panic clawed at her throat. "Because I can restructure your team, bring in support, we can... It's not about the merger." His voice had been gentle, which somehow made it worse. "It's about me. I'm burned out, Lena. I'm making mistakes. I barely recognize myself anymore." She'd wanted to argue, to fix it, to do what she always did, solve the problem with logic and resources and sheer force of will, but something in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't negotiating, he was drowning. "I understand," she'd heard herself say. "You've been invaluable to this company. If you need references, recommendations, thank you." He'd turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For the record, working with you has been the best part of my career. I hope you know that." Then he was gone. She'd spent the next 3 days burying herself in work, approving his departure paperwork with mechanical efficiency, and pretending the silence in her late-night office didn't feel like a death. No more 11 p.m. calls about project timelines that turned into conversations about books and childhood dreams. No more email chains that started professional and ended with Ryan sending her motorcycle photos with subject lines like "Freedom Machine" and her responding with "Impractical Death Trap," and both of them knowing it meant something more. The intercom buzzed again. "Miss Marlowe, legal is asking if you need to reschedule." Lena stood, smoothed her charcoal suit, and made herself answer. "Tell them I'll be right there." She left the resignation letter on her desk and walked toward the conference room, each step a practice performance of control. But her mind was 6 months in the past, to the night everything changed. 6 months earlier, Ryan Cole's apartment looked like a crime scene, if the crime was giving up, Empty takeout containers covered the kitchen counter. Laundry overflowed the bedroom hamper. On the coffee table, a note sat weighted down by his house keys. The keys his girlfriend of 4 years had left behind when she walked out. I can't do this anymore. You're married to your job. I'm done being the mistress. Don't call me. No signature. No forwarding address. Just keys and a truth that cut deeper because he couldn't even argue with it. Ryan read the note for the dozenth time, then let it fall back to the table. Outside his window, the city hummed with Friday night energy. People laughing, living, connecting. He felt separated from all of it by glass and exhaustion and the spreadsheet he'd been staring at for 3 hours without processing a single number. His phone buzzed. Lena Marlowe's name lit up the screen. He almost didn't answer. It was 11:47 p.m. Any work call this late meant crisis, and he didn't have crisis left in him tonight. But Lena didn't call unless it mattered, so he picked up. Ryan. Her voice was crisp, alert, probably caffeinated. I need the Q3 projections revised. Legal found issues with the language around the Springfield contract. I'll have it to you by Monday, he said automatically. Silence. Then, are you okay? The question landed wrong. Too personal, too perceptive. Lena Marlowe didn't do personal. She did quarterly targets and operational efficiency and strategic pivots. She'd built Marlowe Manufacturing from her grandfather's legacy into an industry leader by being smarter and tougher and more ruthless than everyone around her. She didn't ask employees if they were okay. Long week, Ryan managed. More silence. He could hear her thinking, weighing words with the same precision she applied to million-dollar decisions. The projections can wait until Tuesday, she said finally. Take the weekend. Actually take it. Don't work. Ryan blinked at his dark reflection in the window. You never tell people not to work. I'm telling you now. Her tone shifted, something almost soft underneath the executive polish. You've been running flat out for months. The merger prep is killing everyone, but you've been carrying more than your share. Take 2 days. Sleep. Eat something that didn't come from a plastic container. Come back Tuesday. He should have said thank you and hung up. Instead, he heard himself say, My girlfriend left me. The words hung in the silence like smoke. Ryan couldn't believe he'd said them out loud, especially to her. Lena Marlowe, who was so far above his pay grade, she might as well exist in a different atmosphere. Lena, who he'd been half in love with since his first week at the company, when she'd demolished a vendor's predatory contract in a conference room and he'd realized he was watching a master at work. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm sorry. It's fine, it was coming. He rubbed his face, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. She was right anyway. I put the job first. I always put the job first. Ryan, I should go. I'll get you those projections Tuesday. He hung up before she could respond, then immediately felt like an idiot. You didn't trauma dump on the CEO. You didn't hang up on her mid-sentence. You definitely didn't confess personal failures while she was calling about work. His phone buzzed 30 seconds later. A text from Lena. For what it's worth, anyone who gives you an ultimatum between them and your career doesn't deserve you. Take the weekend. That's an order. Then, 10 seconds later. Also, you didn't let me finish. Legal can wait until Wednesday. Tuesday's too soon. Ryan stared at the messages, something warm and dangerous unfurling in his chest. He typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, Thank you. Her reply came immediately. Don't thank me. Just rest. He did rest, for the first time in months. And when he came back Wednesday, Lena was waiting at his desk with coffee, the good stuff from her private machine, and a quiet question about whether he was really okay. They ended up talking for 20 minutes about nothing related to work, her grandfather's original machine shop, his college years as a philosophy major who accidentally fell into operations management, the weather, books they'd read. It was the first real conversation they'd had as people instead of CEO and employee. It wouldn't be the last. Over the next 4 months, the late-night work calls transformed into something neither of them named. It started innocently enough. Lena would call about a project timeline. They'd resolve the issue in 5 minutes, and then somehow they'd still be talking an hour later. Ryan learned that she woke up at 4:30 a.m. every morning and worked out in her building's gym while listening to murder podcasts. She learned that he'd wanted to be a writer before practicality, and student loans steered him toward business school. "What kind of writing?" she asked one night in late March, her voice slightly fuzzy in a way that made him think she was lying down, maybe in bed with the lights off. "Fiction, stories." Ryan was in his kitchen making tea he didn't need because his hands needed something to do. "I had this idea for a road novel. Guy buys a vintage motorcycle, fixes it up, rides cross-country with no destination. Just freedom." "Did you write it?" "Started it, never finished. Life got busy, then I got a real job, then—" He shrugged even though she couldn't see it. "You know how it goes." "I do," Lena said softly. "I wanted to be an architect, design buildings that made people feel something. My grandfather had other plans." Ryan had seen photos of her grandfather, Marcus Marlowe, legendary industrialist, builder of empires, the kind of man who turned steel and sweat into generational wealth. "Did you fight him on it?" "At first, then he died, and I inherited everything, and fighting felt disrespectful to his memory." She paused. "That's a lie. Fighting felt like failure. If I couldn't run the company, someone else would, and that was unacceptable." "Do you regret it?" "Every single day," she said, "and not at all. Both things are true." They talked until 2 a.m. that night. Ryan fell asleep with his phone still in his hand and woke up to a text from Lena. "Thank you for listening. I don't usually talk about that." He responded, "Thank you for trusting me with it." The calls became routine. 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. They'd start with work, merger prep, vendor negotiations, staffing decisions, and drift into everything else. Lena told him about growing up wealthy and lonely, groomed from childhood to inherit an empire she never wanted but couldn't abandon. Ryan told her about his middle-class suburban upbringing, the pressure to be practical, the quiet grief of setting aside dreams for stability. "Do you still want the motorcycle?" she asked one night in early May. "God, yes." Ryan was walking home from the office, phone pressed to his ear, spring air warm against his face. "I've been watching online auctions. There's a 1973 Triumph Bonneville in Cleveland that's perfect. Needs work, but the bones are solid." "Why don't you buy it?" "Money's tight right now. The breakup was expensive. I had to buy out Sarah's half of the furniture, first month and deposit on my new place." He kicked a piece of sidewalk gravel. "Plus, I'd need somewhere to work on it. My apartment building doesn't allow garage projects." "You could use my garage," Lena said. Ryan stopped walking. "What?" "I have a 3-car garage. I use one space. The other 2 just collect dust." She said it casually, like she was offering to share a printer, not inviting him into her private space. "If you buy the bike, you could restore it there." "Lena, I can't." "Why not?" "Because you're my boss. Because it's weird. Because you think I'm offering out of pity?" Her voice sharpened. "I'm not. I'm offering because you light up when you talk about that bike, and I'd like to see you build something for yourself instead of just for the company. If that makes you uncomfortable, forget I mentioned it." Ryan stood on the sidewalk, people streaming past him, and felt the world reorganize itself. Lena Marlowe, ice queen, corporate titan, woman who ate venture capitalists for breakfast, wanted to help him restore a motorcycle, wanted to see him happy. The implications made his heart pound. "I'll think about it," he said carefully. "Think fast. That Triumph won't stay available forever." He bought the bike 2 weeks later, started restoration work in Lena's garage every Saturday, while she pretended to need to organize storage boxes in the same space, and they ended up talking for hours, surrounded by chrome and grease and possibility. Those Saturdays became sacred. Ryan would text her Friday night, "Garage tomorrow?" And she'd respond immediately, 10 a.m., "Bring coffee." They'd work in comfortable silence, broken by conversation, her asking about engine specs, him explaining the difference between carburetors and fuel injection, both of them carefully not acknowledging that they were building something more dangerous than a motorcycle. In June, the merger accelerated. Marlowe Manufacturing was acquiring a competitor, Tri-State Industrial, a $200 million company with facilities in 3 states and a corporate culture that made a Viper Pit look friendly. The deal would double their footprint and cement Lena's reputation as an industry titan, It would also require 18-hour days, weekend work, and the kind of sustained pressure that broke people. Ryan was the merger lead. Lena's choice, her trust, her belief in his competence. He couldn't say no. The first week he worked 90 hours, the second week 95. The third week, he stopped counting because the numbers made him nauseous. He lived on coffee and protein bars and 4 hours of sleep. The motorcycle restoration stopped. The late-night calls with Lena stopped. They were in the office together until midnight most nights anyway. No need for phone conversations when they were physically in the same building. But the dynamic changed. At work, Lena was all business, sharp questions, impossible deadlines, the weight of her expectations like gravity. Ryan pushed himself to meet every demand, determined to prove her faith in him wasn't misplaced. He reviewed contracts until his eyes blurred, managed integration teams across time zones, negotiated with tri-state executives who saw the merger as hostile takeover and treated Marlowe staff like invaders. By early August, he was making mistakes. Small ones at first, transposed numbers in spreadsheets, missed emails, forgotten follow-ups. Then bigger ones. He sent sensitive merger documents to the wrong distribution list, mixed up meeting times and left a tri-state VP waiting in an empty conference room for 40 minutes, snapped at a colleague who asked a reasonable question. Lena noticed. She always noticed. "Ryan, my office," she said one Thursday afternoon, her tone leaving no room for argument. He followed her down the hall, dread pooling in his stomach. In 3 years at Marlowe Manufacturing, he'd never been called to her office for a reprimand. He'd been the golden child, the one who exceeded expectations, the one she trusted. Not anymore. Lena closed the door behind them and gestured to the chair across from her desk. Ryan sat. She didn't. "Talk to me," she said. "About what?" "About why you're falling apart." She crossed her arms, leaning against her desk, those ice blue eyes reading him like a balance sheet. "You missed the tri-state call this morning. You've sent me 3 reports this week with errors that aren't like you. Your team says you're irritable. What's going on?" Ryan wanted to lie, to say he was fine, to keep the mask in place. But he was so tired, and Lena was looking at him with something that wasn't quite anger, more like concern wearing armor. "I'm drowning," he admitted. "The merger is too big. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. I'm working all the time. I'm not sleeping. I feel like I'm vibrating out of my skin, and I still can't keep up." Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she moved around her desk, sat in the chair beside him instead of behind the power position, and said something that broke his heart. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you trusted me with this. Because I didn't want to let you down." "Ryan." She leaned forward, elbows on knees, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and subtle. "You're not letting me down. You're human. This merger is massive. I should have seen the strain. I should have..." She stopped, jaw tight. "I should have protected you better. It's not your job to protect me." "It is, actually." Her voice was fierce. "I'm the CEO. My people are my responsibility. And you..." She cut herself off, looked away. "You matter. Your well-being matters. If this merger costs you your health, it's not worth it." Ryan's chest felt tight. "I don't know what to do." "We restructure. I bring in consultants to take half your load. You start leaving at 7 p.m. every night, no exceptions. You take weekends off." "Lena, the timeline stretches. I'll handle the board." She met his eyes. "I need you functional more than I need you fast. Can you accept that?" He wanted to. He wanted to believe restructuring would fix it, that working less would restore him, that he could find his way back to the person he'd been before the merger devoured him. But somewhere deep in his bones, Ryan knew the truth. The problem wasn't just the hours. It was the disappearance of himself. The way work had consumed everything. His writing, his motorcycle, his late-night conversations with Lena that made him feel seen. He'd become a function instead of a person, valuable only for productivity, and he was terrified that if he stopped producing, he'd stop existing. "I'll try," he said. Lena studied him, then nodded. "That's all I'm asking." She restructured his workload that week, brought in 2 consultants who took over tri-state facility integration, implemented a 7 p.m. hard stop for Ryan's team. checked in daily to make sure he was actually leaving. It helped for about 10 days. Then the Tri-State CEO threatened to walk from the merger over intellectual property disputes, and Ryan spent 72 hours straight negotiating with lawyers and finance teams and executives who saw him as an obstacle instead of an ally. He didn't sleep, barely ate, lived on adrenaline and spite, and the knowledge that if this deal fell through, Lena's reputation would take the hit. When the crisis resolved, IP dispute settled, merger back on track, Ryan went home at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, collapsed on his couch, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. His hands shook. His chest ached. He felt like static, like a radio stuck between stations, noise without signal. At 6 a.m., he opened his laptop and started writing. Dear Lena, I'm resigning, effective immediately. This isn't about the merger, the company, or your leadership. It's about me saving my own life before there's nothing left to save. Thank you for everything. You've been the best boss I've ever had, and working with you has been the privilege of my career. I'm sorry I can't see the merger through. I'm sorry I'm not strong enough. But I have to leave before I disappear completely. Ryan. He read it once, made himself not edit or second guess, and sent it before courage could fail. Then he closed his laptop, lay down on his couch, and fell asleep for 14 hours straight. When he woke up, his phone had 6 missed calls from Lena and a text that said only, "Please come to the office. We need to talk." Ryan didn't go. He couldn't face her, couldn't withstand the disappointment or the logic or the inevitable conversation where she tried to fix what was unfixable. Instead, he texted back, "I meant what I wrote. I'm done. I'm sorry." She didn't respond. The next day, HR called to confirm his resignation and discuss final paycheck logistics. Professional, efficient, no drama. Ryan signed the separation paperwork electronically, returned his laptop and badge to the office mailroom when he knew Lena would be in meetings, and spent his first Thursday as an unemployed person cleaning his apartment with manic energy. He scrubbed counters, organized closets, threw out the takeout containers that had accumulated like evidence of failure, tried not to think about Lena's face when she read his resignation, or the late-night conversations they'd never have again, or the motorcycle still sitting in her garage, half restored and abandoned. By Friday evening, the apartment was spotless, and Ryan felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything but exhaustion. He ordered pizza, actual food, not protein bars, and was halfway through his second slice when someone knocked on his door. He wasn't expecting visitors. His friends had long since stopped inviting him places. His family lived 3 states away. For a confused moment, Ryan wondered if he'd ordered something online and forgotten. He opened the door. Lena Marlowe stood in his hallway, soaked to the skin. It was pouring outside, one of those sudden autumn storms that turned streets into rivers, and she looked like she'd walked through all of it. Her charcoal coat dripped water onto his doormat. Her hair, usually pinned in perfect executive style, hung loose and wet around her face. Mascara tracked down her cheeks in dark rivulets. She was holding a manila envelope against her chest like a shield. They stared at each other. Ryan's mind went blank, then overloaded. Lena was here, at his apartment, drenched and shaking and looking at him like he was the answer to a question she was terrified to ask. "I'm sorry," she said, voice raw. "I know you wanted space. I know showing up here is inappropriate and probably crosses 10 HR boundaries, but Her breath hitched. "I accepted you quitting. I understood it. I even agreed with it. You needed to leave, and I should have seen that months ago." She stepped closer. Water dripped from her coat onto his floor. "But I can't accept losing you completely. I can't accept the idea that we just stop. That you disappear from my life and I pretend those late-night conversations didn't matter. That the garage Saturdays were just about a motorcycle. That I don't..." She stopped, swallowed hard, held out the envelope with trembling hands. "I created a position. It's all in here. Job description, salary, benefits. It's remote, flexible hours, leading a company-wide wellness initiative, creating programs to prevent exactly what happened to you from happening to anyone else. It's real work, important work, and I think you'd be incredible at it." Ryan took the envelope on autopilot, too stunned to process. "But that's not why I'm here," Lena continued. and now her voice was shaking too. I'm here because I've spent 3 days pretending I'm fine, telling myself that losing you is just business, that I can move on like I move on from everything, and I can't. She looked him in the eyes, and Ryan saw something he'd never seen before. Lena Marlowe, terrified and unguarded and completely human. I don't want to be your boss anymore, she said. I want... She broke off, laughed bitterly. I don't even know how to say this. I'm good at boardrooms and negotiations and strategic planning. I'm terrible at this. At what? Ryan's voice came out hoarse. At telling you that you matter to me. Not as an employee, as a person. As... She pressed her lips together, clearly fighting for composure. I'm in love with you, Ryan. I have been for months, maybe longer. And I couldn't say anything while you worked for me, couldn't cross that line, but you don't work for me anymore. So I'm here, in the rain, humiliating myself, because the thought of you walking out of my life forever is worse than any rejection you could possibly give me. Ryan forgot how to breathe. Lena Marlowe, untouchable, brilliant, terrifying Lena Marlowe, was standing in his doorway confessing feelings he'd convinced himself were impossible. The woman he'd loved in silence for 3 years, the one he'd resigned to escape because staying near her without having her was torture, was telling him she loved him back. Say something, she whispered. Please. Come inside, Ryan managed. You're soaking wet and we need to just come inside. She hesitated like she might bolt, then stepped across the threshold into his small, messy, painfully normal apartment. Ryan closed the door behind her, sealing them in together, and felt the foundation of his entire world shift. This was the climax they'd been building toward for months without knowing it. The moment when everything they'd been too afraid to name finally demanded recognition, and Ryan had a choice to make. Ryan's apartment had never felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in as Lena stood dripping on his worn carpet, the manila envelope clutched between them like evidence of something neither could take back. Outside, rain hammered against the windows and sheets, turning the city lights into watercolor blurs. Inside, the silence stretched so tight, Ryan thought it might snap. I should get you a towel, he said, because his brain had apparently decided that domestic logistics were easier than processing the fact that Lena Marlowe had just told him she was in love with him. Ryan, her voice was quiet but firm. I didn't come here for a towel. I know, He ran his hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how he must look. Rumpled t-shirt, old jeans, 2 days of stubble, the walking embodiment of unemployment. Meanwhile, she stood there in her executive coat and tailored slacks, even soaked to the bone, still radiating a competence he'd lost weeks ago. I need a second to catch up. You just said, I'm in love with you. She said it again, clearer this time, like repetition would make it more real. I know the timing is terrible. I know I should have waited, should have given you space to recover before dumping this on you. But I spent 3 days trying to be professional about your resignation, trying to accept it gracefully, and all I could think about was that I'd never get another late-night call, never see you in the garage on Saturday mornings, never. Her breath caught. She looked down at the envelope still in her hands, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller. I've never done this before. Shown up at someone's door, said these things out loud. I don't know the rules. Something in Ryan's chest cracked open. All his life, he'd seen Lena as untouchable, a woman who commanded rooms and closed deals and moved through the world with absolute certainty. But standing in his apartment with mascara-stained cheeks and trembling hands, she wasn't a CEO. She was just a person taking a terrifying risk, just like he had when he sent that resignation letter. There aren't rules, Ryan said softly. Or if there are, we've already broken most of them. Lena's eyes snapped to his, searching. What does that mean? It means I've been in love with you since my first month at Marlowe Manufacturing. The confession spilled out before courage could fail. It means every late-night call felt like stealing something I wasn't allowed to have. It means I spent Saturday mornings in your garage pretending I was working on a motorcycle when really I was just desperate to be near you. Her sharp intake of breath was audible even over the rain. It means, Ryan continued, his voice gaining strength, that part of why I resigned was because staying near you without being able to have you was killing me. I was burning out from the merger, yes, but I was also breaking from wanting something I thought was impossible. Ryan, let me finish. He took a step closer, close enough to see the silver flecks in her blue eyes, close enough to smell rain and expensive perfume and possibility. You showing up here tonight telling me how you feel? It's the most terrifying and exhilarating thing that's ever happened to me. But I need you to understand something. Lena's fingers tightened on the envelope. What? I meant what I wrote in that resignation letter. I was disappearing. The merger was consuming me, and I couldn't see a way out except to leave completely. He gestured around his small apartment, the second-hand couch, the motorcycle magazines on the coffee table, the life he was trying to rebuild. I'm not the same person I was when I started at your company. I'm not sure who I am right now, and I can't. His throat tightened. I can't be what you need me to be if I don't figure out who I am first. The words hung between them like a suspended sentence. Ryan watched Lena process them, saw the flicker of pain cross her face before she locked it down with practiced control. I'm not asking you to be anything except yourself, she said quietly. That's the point. The person you think you need to be, the one who works 90-hour weeks and sacrifices everything for the job, that's not who I fell in love with. Then who did you fall in love with? The man who lights up talking about vintage motorcycles and road trips he's never taken. The one who sends me book recommendations at midnight and argues about character motivation like it matters. The person who listened when I told you about wanting to be an architect, who didn't judge me for inheriting an empire I never wanted. She took a shaky breath. I fell in love with Ryan Cole, the human being, not Ryan Cole, the employee. And I'm standing here because I don't want to lose the human being. Ryan felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he'd been carrying for months without naming. I don't want to lose you either, but I'm terrified. Of what? Of this being another thing I fail at, of not being enough, of... He stopped, forced himself to say the hardest part. Of you realizing I'm not worth the risk. Lena set the envelope down on the small table by his door with deliberate care, like she was making a decision. Then she closed the distance between them until they were barely a foot apart, her rain-soaked presence filling his senses. Listen to me very carefully, she said, and her voice carried that boardroom steel he knew so well, turned toward protecting instead of commanding. You are not a failure. You recognized that you were drowning, and you made the hardest choice. You saved yourself. That's not weakness, that's survival. It doesn't feel like survival. It feels like quitting. Because you've spent your whole life being told that quitting means failure. She reached up, hesitated for half a second, then gently touched his face. Her fingers were cold from the rain, but her touch burned. I'm telling you it means wisdom. You quit a situation that was destroying you. That takes more courage than staying. Ryan's eyes stung. He'd spent 3 days feeling like a coward, like he'd abandoned ship when the company needed him most, like he'd let Lena down in the worst possible way. But she was looking at him like he'd done something brave instead of broken. I missed you, he admitted, his voice rough. The second I sent that resignation, I missed you, not the job. You. I missed you too. Her thumb brushed his cheekbone, a gesture so tender it made his breath catch. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I kept reaching for my phone to call you, then remembering you were gone. I'd see something I wanted to tell you about and realize I couldn't anymore. I went to the garage on Saturday out of habit, and your motorcycle was just sitting there, half finished, and She broke off, blinking rapidly. You what? Ryan prompted gently. I sat on the floor next to it and cried. The admission came out like a confession. Which is insane because I don't cry. I haven't cried in years, but I looked at that triumph and thought about all the Saturdays we'd spent there, talking and laughing and building something together, and the idea that those were over broke something in me. Ryan moved on instinct, pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her rain-soaked shoulders. She stiffened for half a second. Lena Marlowe didn't do vulnerability, didn't accept comfort, then melted into him with a sound that might have been relief or surrender, or both. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing together, rain drumming overhead. Ryan could feel her heart pounding against his chest, could feel her trembling slightly, could feel the careful control she'd maintained for years finally cracking apart. I don't know how to do this, she whispered against his shoulder. Relationship, feelings, any of it. I've spent my entire adult life focused on the company. I've had dates, flings, things that look like relationships from the outside but never meant anything. And now I'm here, in your apartment, telling you things I've never told anyone, and I'm terrified I'm doing it all wrong. Ryan pulled back just enough to see her face. You showed up in the rain to tell me you love me. That's pretty much perfect. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Is it? Yeah. He smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in months. Though next time maybe check the weather forecast first. Next time, she tested the words like they held weight. Does that mean, it means I love you too? Well, Ryan said it clearly, no hesitation, letting the truth fill the space between them. It means I want to try this, whatever this is. But I need you to understand that I'm not ready to jump back into work. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Lena nodded slowly. The position I created, it's real and the offer stands, but there's no timeline. Take a month, 2 months, however long you need. Or don't take it at all. This, she gestured between them. This isn't contingent on employment. You created a whole position for me. I created a position the company needs and you'd be perfect for. But if you never step foot in Marlowe Manufacturing again, I still want this. I still want you. Ryan studied her face, looking for doubt or obligation or the careful diplomacy she deployed in boardrooms. He found none of it, just Lena, stripped of armor, offering him something precious and terrifying. I need time, he said carefully, to figure out who I am outside of work, to rest, to finish that motorcycle and maybe actually take the trip I've been dreaming about for years. Can you give me that? Yes. No hesitation, no negotiation. Take whatever time you need. And I need us to start this right. Not as boss and employee, not as CEO and wellness director or whatever the position is, just as two people figuring out if this works. What does that look like? Ryan considered. Dates. Real ones. Coffee shops and movies and terrible restaurant choices. Conversations that aren't at midnight because we're both working. Getting to know each other outside of Marlowe Manufacturing. I'd like that. Lena's smile was small but genuine. Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at dating. My last relationship ended because I canceled 3 dates in a row for board meetings. Lucky for you, I'm unemployed. My schedule is wide open. She laughed, a real sound that lit up her whole face, and Ryan felt something shift into place. This could work. This terrifying, impossible thing might actually work. You should probably change, he said, gesturing at her soaked coat. You're going to catch pneumonia standing there. Lena glanced down at herself, seeming to notice for the first time that she was dripping water all over his floor. I didn't exactly plan the dramatic entrance. I was sitting in my car outside your building for 20 minutes, arguing with myself about whether to come up. Then it started pouring and I thought if I didn't move right, then I'd lose my nerve. I'm glad you didn't lose your nerve. Ryan moved toward his bedroom. Wait here, I'll get you something dry. He rummaged through his dresser, emerging with an old college sweatshirt and sweatpants that would be too big on her, but at least were clean. When he returned to the living room, Lena had removed her coat and was standing by his bookshelf, studying his collection with the same intensity she probably brought to contract negotiations. You have 3 copies of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, she observed. Different editions. The 1974 original, the 25th anniversary, and the recent one with the afterword. He handed her the dry clothes. Bathrooms down the hall. She took them, fingers brushing his, then paused. Ryan? Thank you. For dry clothes? For not slamming the door in my face. For listening, for... She struggled for words. For being kind even when I showed up unannounced and probably scared you half to death. You didn't scare me, you surprised me. There's a difference. Lena disappeared into the bathroom. Ryan heard the door close, water running, the small domestic sounds of her in his space. It felt surreal. Lena Marlowe in his apartment, wearing his clothes, having just confessed feelings he'd spent years believing were impossible. He picked up the manila envelope she'd left on the table, opened it. Inside was a formal job description printed on Marlowe Manufacturing letterhead, exactly as she'd described, Director of Employee Wellness and Organizational Health. Remote work, flexible hours, comprehensive benefits, a salary that made his eyes widen. Below the job description was a handwritten note in Lena's precise script. This is real work that matters. But it's also not why I came tonight. Whatever you decide about the job, I meant what I said. I love you, and I want this to work. No pressure, no timelines, no expectations except honesty. L. Ryan was still holding the note when Lena emerged from the bathroom. She'd towel-dried her hair and changed into his sweatshirt and pants, both comically oversized. Without makeup and formal clothes, she looked younger, softer, almost fragile. She caught him staring and smiled self-consciously. I look ridiculous. You look beautiful, Ryan said honestly, and cold. Come here. He guided her to the couch, wrapped a throw blanket around her shoulders, then sat beside her, close but not touching, giving her space to breathe. Outside, the storm was settling into steady rain, the kind that would last all night. Tell me about the position, he said, gesturing to the papers. What made you think of it? Lena pulled the blanket tighter, organizing her thoughts. After you resigned, I started reviewing our company policies, benefits, work-life balance, mental health support. What I found was embarrassing. We offer the legal minimum for mental health coverage, we have no programs to prevent burnout, and our culture basically rewards people for destroying themselves in service of productivity. That's most companies. That doesn't make it right. Her voice carried that edge of determination he recognized from board meetings. You weren't the first person to burn out at Marlowe Manufacturing. You were just the first one I cared enough about to notice. Before you, I accepted that high-pressure work came with casualties. People who couldn't handle it left, and I replaced them with people who could. Efficient, ruthless, and completely wrong. Ryan watched her face as she spoke, saw the genuine remorse there. Creating this position isn't charity, Lena continued. It's acknowledgement that I've been failing my people. If someone with your dedication and competence burned out, the problem isn't you, it's the system, and I need someone who understands that system from the inside to help me fix it. Someone who broke under it, you mean? Someone who survived it and has the insight to prevent others from experiencing the same thing. She met his eyes. But I meant what I wrote. This isn't contingent on us. If you take the job and we don't work out romantically, you keep the job. If you never take the job and we do work out, that's fine too. These are separate decisions. Ryan believed her. Lena might be many things, but she wasn't manipulative. If she said the job was real and the relationship was separate, she meant it. Can I ask you something? He said. Anything. When did you know? About us, I mean. When did it stop being just late-night work calls? Lena thought for a moment, pulling the blanket around herself like armor. Remember that night in March when you told me about the road novel you never finished? The motorcycle trip with no destination? Ryan nodded. You talked about freedom like it was something sacred. Like the whole point of life was finding moments where you weren't performing for anyone, where you could just exist without purpose or productivity. And I remember thinking... She paused, voice going soft. I remember thinking that I'd never felt that way about anything. That my whole life was purpose and productivity, and I didn't know how to exist outside of it. That made you fall in love with me? No. A small smile touched her lips. That made me envious. What made me fall in love was 3 days later when you called me at 2 a.m. because you couldn't sleep. You said you'd been thinking about our conversation and you wanted to know if I'd ever felt free. Ever had a moment where I wasn't being Marcus Marlowe's granddaughter or the CEO or any of the roles I perform? Ryan remembered that call. He'd been half asleep himself, words coming easier in darkness. I told you about being 16, Lena continued, sneaking out of my grandfather's estate to go to public library, just sitting there for hours reading architecture books, dreaming about buildings I'd never designed, feeling like a normal teenager for 5 precious hours before my security detail found me and dragged me home. You cried during that call, Ryan said quietly. I heard it in your voice. I did. And you didn't make it awkward or try to fix it. You just said, everyone deserves moments where they're not performing. And I realized I'd been performing my entire life except for those late-night calls with you. She looked at him directly. That's when I knew. When I understood that you saw me as a person first and the CEO second. That's so rare it felt like oxygen. Ryan's throat tightened. I see you, Lena. I've always seen you. I know. That's why I'm here. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain. Ryan's mind was spinning through possibilities and fears and hopes he'd suppressed for years. Lena Marlowe loved him, wanted to build something with him. The woman who commanded boardrooms and closed nine-figure deals was sitting on his second-hand couch in his old sweatshirt, looking at him like he held something precious. "I'm still scared," he admitted, "of this, of failing, of not being enough." "So am I." Lena shifted closer until their shoulders touched. "But I'm more scared of not trying. I've spent my whole life playing it safe, staying in the lane my grandfather set out, never taking personal risks, keeping relationships at arm's length. And it's made me successful and miserable in equal measure." "You don't seem miserable." "Because I'm good at hiding it. You know what the worst part of being CEO is? Not the pressure or the hours or the impossible decisions. It's the loneliness. Everyone wants something from me. The board wants growth. Employees want stability. Vendors want contracts. No one just wants me." "I want you, Ryan said. "No agenda, no expectations. Just you." Lena turned to face him fully, and her eyes were bright. "Then let's try this slowly, carefully, honestly. We go on actual dates. We figure out who we are outside of Marlowe Manufacturing. We mess up and talk about it instead of running. Can we do that?" "I think so." Ryan reached out, took her hand. Her fingers were still cold but warming. "Where do we start?" "How about breakfast tomorrow? There's a diner on 5th Street I've driven past 1,000 times but never stopped at. We could go, just two people having pancakes and terrible coffee." Ryan smiled. "That sounds perfect." "Really? Because I was worried it was too mundane." "Lena, I've spent 3 years having late-night conversations with you about philosophy and motorcycles and childhood dreams. Mundane sounds revolutionary." She laughed, that genuine sound he loved, and squeezed his hand. "Breakfast at 9? I'll be there." They talked for another hour, mapping out the shape of what this might look like. Boundaries and expectations, fears and hopes, the logistics of building something real. Lena needed to learn how to separate work from personal life, to stop checking email at midnight and trust her team. Ryan needed time to heal, to rediscover himself outside of productivity and performance. They both needed to practice vulnerability, honesty, and the terrifying work of letting someone see them completely. Around midnight, Lena stood to leave. She changed back into her own clothes, mostly dry now, and looked more like herself, though softer around the edges than he'd ever seen her at the office. "Thank you for tonight," she said at the door. "For listening, for being honest, for not thinking I was completely insane for showing up in the rain." "Thank you for showing up." Ryan squeezed her hand. "Drive safe." "Always." She hesitated, then leaned in and kissed his cheek, brief and sweet and full of promise. "See you at 9. Then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of her perfume and the echo of possibility. Ryan closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 years. Lena Marlowe loved him. They were going to breakfast tomorrow. His whole life had reorganized itself in the space of 2 hours, and for the first time since sending that resignation letter, he felt something other than hollow. He felt hopeful. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Yesterday's storm washed away to nothing. Ryan arrived at the 5th Street Diner at 8:55, nervous as a teenager on a first date. The place was exactly what he'd expected. Vinyl booths, linoleum floors, waitresses who called everyone hon, and the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee. Perfect. Lena walked in at 9:02, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual tailored suits. No makeup except lip gloss, hair down instead of pinned up. She looked beautiful and terrified and completely human. "Hi," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Hi." Ryan couldn't stop smiling. "You're late." "I was sitting in my car again, panicking." She smiled back. "Turns out showing up for a date is just as scary as showing up in the rain." "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." A waitress appeared with coffee, actually terrible, as promised, and menus. They ordered breakfast, made small talk about the weather, the diner's questionable decorating choices, anything except the weight of what they were attempting. But underneath the mundane conversation, something else was building. Ease, comfort, the beginning of something real. Can I tell you something? Lena said as their food arrived. Pancakes for her, an omelet for him. Always. I haven't been on a real date in 4 years. I'm completely out of practice. Ryan reached across the table, took her hand. Lucky for you, I'm unemployed and rusty too. We can be disasters together. She laughed, and the sound filled the diner like light. Deal. They ate breakfast and talked about everything except work. Books they'd read, places they wanted to travel, childhood embarrassments, favorite films. Ryan learned that Lena had wanted a dog her entire life, but never felt like she had time for one. Lena learned that Ryan had a secret talent for baking bread, but hadn't made a loaf in years. Small details, mundane facts, the building blocks of actually knowing someone outside of professional context. As they finished eating, Lena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it reflexively, then deliberately turned it face down on the table. Work? Ryan asked. Emergency board meeting. They want me there in an hour. She sighed. Old habits. I should take it. Should you? Lena looked at the phone, then at Ryan, then at the half-finished pancakes on her plate. He could see her calculating the cost of missing the meeting versus the cost of cutting this short, CEO obligations versus personal desires, the endless triage of importance she'd performed her whole life. Then she picked up the phone and typed a quick message. Set it back down. I told them I'm unavailable until this afternoon. They can handle it without me. Ryan felt his chest expand. Yeah? Yeah. She met his eyes. I meant what I said last night. I want to learn how to do this, put personal life first, trust other people to handle things, stop acting like the company will collapse without me. So I'm starting now. That's huge. It's terrifying, she smiled. But so is everything else about this, and I'm doing it anyway. They left the diner an hour later, standing on the sidewalk in weak autumn sunlight, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Ryan's hands were in his pockets to keep from reaching for her. Lena was studying him with that analytical intensity he recognized from the office, like she was trying to memorize this moment. What are you doing tomorrow? She asked. Nothing. Why? I thought maybe we could work on your motorcycle in my garage if you want. Ryan's heart kicked. I'd love that. Okay, 10 a.m.? I'll bring coffee. Lena smiled, stepped closer, and this time when she kissed him, it wasn't his cheek. It was soft and brief, and tasted like maple syrup and possibility. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. See you tomorrow, Ryan. See you tomorrow, Lena. He watched her walk to her car, a sleek BMW that screamed executive success, and drive away. Then he stood on that sidewalk for 5 minutes, grinning like an idiot, feeling the first real joy he'd experienced in months settling into his bones. This was the beginning. Messy and uncertain and terrifying and absolutely right. The next morning, Ryan showed up at Lena's house with 2 coffees and a nervousness that felt equal parts exhilarating and ridiculous. He'd been to her garage a dozen times before, spent countless Saturday mornings elbow-deep in motorcycle grease while she organized storage boxes that never actually needed organizing. But this was different. Everything was different now. Her house sat in one of the city's older neighborhoods, a restored Victorian with original woodwork and a privacy fence that kept the world at bay. Ryan had always appreciated the irony. Lena lived in a house built for a large family, multiple generations, Sunday dinners and chaos, and she occupied it completely alone. She opened the door before he could knock, like she'd been watching for him. Jeans again, an old flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked impossibly young and nervous and beautiful. You brought coffee, she said, taking one of the cups. I always bring coffee. I know, She stopped herself, smiled. I'm glad you're here. They walked through her house toward the garage, and Ryan noticed details he'd missed before. Books stacked on every available surface, most of them about architecture and design. A violin case gathering dust in the corner. Framed photos of her grandfather but none of her parents, which tracked with what he knew about her childhood. The house felt like a museum to someone else's life, beautiful and sterile and lonely. The garage was different. This space had warmth, the Triumph Bonneville sitting half restored on its center stand, tools organized on pegboards, the smell of motor oil and possibility. Ryan's Saturday morning sanctuary, the one place where he'd been allowed to build something just for himself. "I miss this," he said, running his hand over the Triumph's fuel tank. The metal was cool and smooth, waiting for the final restoration steps that would bring it back to life. Lena stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I came out here twice this week, just sat with it, felt pathetic and couldn't stop myself." "That's not pathetic." "It felt pathetic. I'm the CEO of a manufacturing company. I should have better things to do than sit in my garage mourning a motorcycle that isn't even mine." Ryan looked at her, saw the vulnerability she was trying to hide behind self-deprecation. "You weren't mourning the motorcycle. You were mourning us." "Yeah." She took a sip of coffee, not meeting his eyes. "I was." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Ryan checking the carburetor synchronization while Lena handed him tools with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned his rhythm. The familiarity of it was grounding, a reminder that what they were building wasn't entirely new. They'd been moving toward this for months without naming it. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said after about an hour, her voice careful in that way that meant she'd been building up courage. "Always." "What made you stay gone? After you resigned, I mean. I expected you to come back for your stuff from the garage, but you never did. Just disappeared completely." Ryan sat back on his heels, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. This was the conversation they needed to have, the one that explained the 3 days of silence that had broken them both. "Because seeing you would have destroyed me," he said honestly. "I was barely holding myself together. If I'd come here, if I'd seen you looking at me with disappointment or pity or whatever you were feeling, I would have crumbled. It was easier to just vanish." "I wasn't disappointed." Lena's voice was tight. "I was terrified. I thought I'd pushed you too hard, demanded too much, broken something I couldn't fix. You didn't break me. The job broke me. There's a difference." "Is there?" She set down the wrench she'd been holding, turned to face him fully. "Because I created the environment that allowed it. I set the expectations, I built the culture, I signed off on the merger timeline that crushed you. You can separate me from the job all you want, Ryan, but I was the job." The raw guilt in her voice made his chest ache. He stood, crossed the small distance between them, and took her grease-stained hands in his. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You didn't force me to work 90-hour weeks. You didn't tell me to sacrifice my health. I made those choices because I wanted to prove myself, wanted to be worthy of your trust, wanted to be the person you believed I could be. That's not your fault. That's mine. But I could have stopped it, should have stopped it. Maybe. Or maybe we both made mistakes and we're both learning from them." He squeezed her hands gently. "The Lena who showed up at my door 3 nights ago isn't the same person who signed off on that merger timeline. And I'm not the same person who thought proving myself meant destroying myself. We're both different now." Lena looked down at their joined hands, her throat working. "I keep waiting for you to realize you deserve better than this. Than me. Better than a brilliant, driven woman who's trying to become more human? Better than someone who showed up in the rain to fight for us?" Ryan shook his head. "There isn't better, Lena. There's just this, messy and complicated and real." She leaned forward, rested her forehead against his shoulder, and breathed. Just breathed, like she was trying to absorb the truth of what he was saying. Ryan wrapped his arms around her, held her in the quiet garage with sunlight streaming through the dusty windows, and felt something settle between them. An understanding, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. "I don't know how to not be in control," she whispered against his shirt. "Even here, right now, I'm calculating. Trying to figure out the right thing to say, the right way to be, like this is another negotiation I need to win. What if you stop trying to win and just let yourself feel?" "I don't know how." Ryan pulled back just enough to see her face. "Then we'll learn together. You teach me how to set boundaries with work, I'll teach you how to let go of control. Deal?" A small smile touched her lips. "That seems like you're getting the worst end of that bargain." "I'm getting you. That's the best end of any bargain." She kissed him then, properly this time, her hands coming up to frame his face like he was something precious. Ryan kissed her back, tasting coffee and courage, feeling the tremor in her fingers and the way she softened against him when he pulled her closer. This wasn't the careful kiss from yesterday's sidewalk. This was real and hungry and full of months of wanting they'd both suppressed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena looked dazed. "Wow," she managed. "Yeah." Ryan grinned. "Wow." They spent the rest of the morning working on the Triumph, but the quality of silence had changed. Now it was charged with possibility, with the occasional brush of hands and shared smiles, and the knowledge that they were building something alongside the motorcycle. Around noon, Lena's stomach growled audibly, and she laughed, embarrassed. "I forgot to eat breakfast," she admitted. "I was too nervous." "About seeing me?" "About everything. About whether last night was real or something I'd imagined. About whether you'd change your mind in daylight." She wiped grease from her hands. "I'm not used to things that matter this much." Ryan's heart squeezed. "It's real. I'm real. This is real. Prove it. Have lunch with me." "Here?" "No. There's a place downtown I've always wanted to try but never had anyone to go with. It's supposed to be casual and loud and completely inappropriate for business meetings." Her eyes sparked with something that looked like mischief. "Come with me. Right now. Spontaneous and unplanned." Ryan recognized what she was doing, pushing herself outside her controlled environment, practicing the impulsiveness she'd never allowed herself. "You're not going to check your calendar first? Make a reservation?" "No." She grabbed her keys with decisive energy. "I'm just going to show up and hope they have a table. That's what normal people do, right?" "That's what normal people do." The restaurant was a tiny Italian place, wedged between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, the kind of spot you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. Inside, red checkered tablecloths competed with framed photos of the Amalfi Coast, and the air smelled like garlic and basil and tomatoes slow-cooked with love. A grandmother-type hostess took one look at them, both still wearing garage grease despite their best efforts, and smiled like she knew a secret. "Two?" she asked in an accent thick as marinara. "Please," Lena said. They were seated in a corner booth, handed laminated menus with approximately 700 items, and left to navigate the overwhelming choices. Ryan watched Lena study the menu with the same intensity she probably brought to financial reports, and bit back a smile. "You're allowed to just pick something you like," he said gently. "It doesn't have to be optimal." "I know that." But she kept reading, analyzing, trying to make the perfect choice. Ryan reached across the table, gently pulled the menu from her hands. "Close your eyes." "What?" "Humor me. Close your eyes." She did, looking suspicious but willing. Ryan studied her face in the dim restaurant light, the small crease between her brows, the tension in her jaw, the visible effort it took her to relinquish control even in something as small as lunch. "What's the first thing you think of when I say Italian food?" he asked. "Lasagna. My grandfather's housekeeper made it every Sunday when I was little. It was the only meal that felt like family." Ryan opened his own menu, found the lasagna, and closed it. When their waitress returned, he ordered 2 lasagnas and a bottle of house red wine without consulting Lena. Her eyes flew open. "You just ordered for me." "I did. Are you mad?" She considered, then slowly smiled. "No, I'm relieved. That was exhausting." "What was?" "Trying to make a perfect choice about lunch. It's just lunch." "Why is my brain like this?" "Because you've trained it to optimize everything." Ryan poured them both wine. "But you're allowed to just exist sometimes. Eat food because it sounds good. Make imperfect choices. Be human." Lena took a long sip of wine, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "I hired a therapist this week." The admission surprised him. "Yeah?" "After you resigned, I realized I had no one to talk to about how I felt. No friends close enough to understand, no family left, no—" She gestured vaguely. "I've built this perfect empire and completely isolated myself in the process. That's not sustainable." "That's brave," Ryan said. "Asking for help. It's terrifying. I've spent my whole life being the person who has answers, who fixes problems, who never needs support. Admitting I need a therapist feels like admitting I'm failing. Or admitting you're human. Those aren't the same thing." Their food arrived, massive portions of lasagna that smelled like childhood and comfort. Lena took her first bite and made a sound that was almost indecent. "Oh my God," she mumbled around the mouthful. "This is exactly how I remembered it." Ryan grinned. "Ryan's good? Perfect. You somehow ordered the perfect thing? I listened to what you wanted and trusted your instinct. Revolutionary concept. She pointed her fork at him. You're very pleased with yourself right now. Little bit, yeah. They ate and talked, conversation flowing easier than it had any right to. Lena told him about her first therapy session, how she'd spent 45 minutes trying to explain her childhood before the therapist gently pointed out she was narrating events without accessing feelings. Ryan told her about the past week of unemployment, the strange freedom of days without structure, the creeping anxiety about money and purpose, and whether he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Do you regret it? Lena asked. Resigning? Ryan thought about it honestly. No. I regret that it took getting that broken to make the choice. But the choice itself? No, I needed to leave. I was disappearing. Are you still disappearing? Some days, but less. He reached across the table, took her hand. This helps. You help. I don't want to be the thing you replace work with, another addiction, another way to avoid dealing with yourself. The insight was sharp and uncomfortable and exactly right. How do we prevent that? We're honest. We maintain our own separate lives even while building this. I keep going to therapy. You figure out what you want outside of us. We don't let this consume everything. She squeezed his hand. I don't want to be your whole world, Ryan. I want to be part of a world that includes you, your dreams, your motorcycle trips, your unfinished novel. The novel's not happening. Why not? Because I haven't written fiction in years, because I'm not that person anymore, because... He stopped, heard the excuses and recognized them for what they were. Because I'm scared I'll be bad at it. So be bad at it. Lena said it like it was simple. Write badly. Write the worst novel ever written. At least you'll have tried. When did you become the voice of encouraging risk? Since I showed up on your doorstep in the rain and discovered that terrifying risks sometimes pay off. She smiled. I'm still terrified, for the record. Every minute of this. But I'm doing it anyway. Ryan felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of fear he'd been carrying so long it had become part of his skeleton. What if we made a deal? What kind of deal? You practice letting go of control. I practice taking creative risks. We hold each other accountable. Check in weekly, share progress, celebrate the failures as much as the successes. Lena considered this, her business mind clearly evaluating terms. Then she lifted her wine glass. Deal. To imperfect progress and magnificent failures. Ryan clinked his glass against hers. To trying things that terrify us. To being human instead of productive. To this, he gestured between them, whatever this becomes. They finished lunch and walked back to Lena's house through autumn sunshine, hands linked, neither talking much but both feeling the weight of commitment they'd just made. At her door, Lena hesitated. Do you want to come in? I could make coffee, we could... She stopped, laughed at herself. I'm trying to figure out the rules. What's appropriate on a second date that's also kind of our 50th conversation? There are no rules, Ryan said. What do you want? Honestly, I want you to stay. I want to sit on my couch that no one ever sits on and watch a movie that's probably terrible and just exist with you for a few more hours. She met his eyes. But I also don't want to rush this. Don't want to skip steps or assume intimacy we haven't earned yet. Then let's watch a movie, just a movie, low stakes. They ended up on her enormous sectional couch with a blanket and a romantic comedy from the 90s that was aggressively mediocre. But neither of them cared about the plot. Ryan sat with Lena curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, both of them learning the geography of being close without the pressure of what came next. It was comfortable and slightly awkward and absolutely perfect. Halfway through the movie, Lena's phone rang. She glanced at it, silenced it, then settled back against Ryan. Work? He asked. Board member probably wants to discuss the meeting I skipped this morning. Do you need to take it? No. She said it firmly. I'm exactly where I need to be. Ryan pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathed in her shampoo, and felt peace settle into his bones. This was what he'd been missing, not just Lena, but the permission to exist without performing, to be present instead of productive, to choose connection over obligation. When the movie ended, Lena walked him to the door with obvious reluctance. Thank you for today, she said. For the garage and lunch and the terrible movie and just, she gestured helplessly. For helping me remember what it feels like to be a person instead of a position. Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with the real you. Can I see you tomorrow? Ryan smiled. What did you have in mind? Nothing. That's the point. I want to wake up tomorrow and not have a plan. Call you and see what sounds good in the moment. Is that okay? That's perfect. She kissed him goodbye, longer this time, her hands in his hair and her body pressed close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, her eyes were bright. I'm going to mess this up, she warned. I'm going to work too much and forget to call and probably revert to CEO mode when I'm stressed. I'm going to be difficult. I'm going to be difficult too. I'm going to spiral about unemployment and probably get weird about money and definitely struggle with feeling worthy of this. He cupped her face gently. We'll be difficult together. Promise? Promise. Over the next 2 weeks, they built a routine that wasn't routine at all. Some days they'd spend hours together, long lunches, garage time with the Triumph, walks through the city pointing out architecture and arguing about design. Other days they'd text sporadically, giving each other space to exist independently. Lena went to therapy twice a week and started delegating more at work, actually leaving the office at reasonable hours. Ryan started writing again, terrible and halting at first, but writing nonetheless. They had their first real fight on a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks into whatever this was. Ryan had mentioned looking at job postings, just browsing to see what was available, and Lena's face had gone carefully blank in that way he recognized as her shutting down. You don't need to job hunt, she'd said. The position I created is still available. I know, but I need to see what else is out there. Make sure I'm choosing your offer because I want it, not because it's convenient. Convenient? Her voice had gone cold. Is that what you think this is? No, I think you created a position you believe the company needs and I'd be good at. But I also think part of you created it to keep me close, and I need to know I'm not taking it just to be near you. So my motives are suspect now? Ryan had felt the conversation tilting toward dangerous territory, but pushed forward anyway. Your motives are complicated. So are mine. That's not an accusation, Lena. It's just honesty. Honesty. She'd stood abruptly, pacing her living room with that caged energy he recognized from high-stress board meetings. You want honesty? Fine. Yes. I created that position partly to keep you close, because the thought of you taking some job across the country and me never seeing you again made me physically ill. Is that what you wanted to hear? Actually, yes. Ryan had stayed seated, keeping his voice calm. Because that's real. That's you admitting you want me around, which is different from hiding behind corporate justification. I wasn't hiding. She'd stopped, caught herself, then laughed bitterly. God, you're right. I was totally hiding, presenting it as pure business when really I was just terrified you'd leave. I'm not leaving, but I need to make choices about my career that aren't primarily about us. Can you understand that? Lena had stood at her window, back to him, shoulders tight. For a long moment, Ryan thought she might ask him to leave, shut down completely the way she probably did in boardrooms when negotiations went badly. Then she'd turned around, and her face was open and raw. I understand it intellectually. Emotionally, I hate it. I want to solve this by throwing money at it, by making the perfect offer you can't refuse, by controlling the outcome. She'd crossed back to the couch, sat beside him. But that's not fair to you, and it's not healthy for me. No, it's not. So what do we do? Ryan had taken her hand, felt it trembling slightly. You let me job hunt without panicking. I promise to seriously consider your offer alongside everything else. And we trust that if this is real, it'll survive me making my own choices. That's terrifying. I know. Do it anyway. She had, though Ryan could tell it cost her. Over the next week, Lena visibly worked to give him space while he explored options. He had interviews with 3 different companies, ranging from terrible to interesting. None of them felt right. Too much like returning to the same patterns that had broken him. Different building, but same cage. The wellness position at Marlowe Manufacturing, by contrast, felt like purpose. Creating programs to prevent burnout, restructuring policies to support mental health, building a culture where people could be human instead of just productive. It was real work that mattered, and Ryan found himself genuinely excited about the challenge. But he needed to be sure he was choosing it for the right reasons. I want to take the position, he told Lena over dinner at her place, 3 weeks into their relationship. But I need you to understand something first. She set down her fork, giving him complete attention. Okay. If I take this job, I'm taking it because I believe in the work, because I think I can make a real difference in people's lives. Not because you created it, not to be near you, but because it matters. He held her gaze. That means I'm going to push back on you when I think company policies are wrong. I'm going to challenge the culture you've built, even when it's uncomfortable. I'm going to be an employee who cares more about people than productivity, and that might put us in conflict. I'm counting on it, Lena said quietly. The whole point of the position is to change things. If you just rubber stamp everything I do, you're not doing your job. Can you handle that? Me disagreeing with you at work? Honestly, I don't know. I've never had a personal relationship with an employee before, never had to navigate that separation. She reached across the table, took his hand. But I want to try. We set clear boundaries. At work, you report to the COO, not me. We don't discuss our relationship in the office. We keep business and personal as separate as possible. And if it doesn't work, if mixing professional and personal implodes, then we'll deal with it, together. She squeezed his hand. I'm not asking you to take the job, Ryan. I'm asking you to consider it as a legitimate option, separate from us. If you choose something else, we'll figure that out too. Ryan looked at her, really looked at the woman who'd shown up on his doorstep in the rain, who was learning to relinquish control one painful step at a time, who loved him enough to risk losing him by giving him choice. The decision crystallized. I'll take it, he said. Not starting immediately. I need another month to finish recovering, to get the motorcycle running, to just be unemployed a little longer. But yes, I want the position. Lena's face transformed, relief and joy breaking through her careful composure. Yeah? Yeah. On one condition. Name it. You let me design the programs without interference. Trust me to do the job you hired me for, even when my recommendations make you uncomfortable. She didn't hesitate. Deal. When do you want to start? January. Give me 2 more months to be human, then I'll come back ready to fight for your employees' humanity too. That's perfect. Lena stood, crossed to his side of the table, and kissed him thoroughly. Thank you for choosing this. For choosing us. Thank you for letting it be a choice instead of an obligation. They spent the rest of the evening planning, not the job, but the next 2 months of freedom. Ryan wanted to finish the Triumph restoration, maybe take a short trip to test it out. Lena wanted to use some accumulated vacation time, something she hadn't done in 5 years. They talked about taking a long weekend somewhere, just the two of them, no work and no phones and nothing but road and possibility. As Ryan left that night, walking to his car under stars just beginning to emerge, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just happiness, but rightness. The sense that his life was finally aligning with his values, that he was building something authentic instead of performing someone else's version of success. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena. I'm proud of you. For taking time to heal, for making your own choice, for being brave enough to fight for what you need. See you tomorrow? Ryan smiled, typed back. See you tomorrow. Always tomorrow. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, tomorrow felt like promise instead of threat. The Triumph roared to life on a cold Saturday morning in late November, the engine's rumble echoing through Lena's garage like a victory song. Ryan sat astride the vintage motorcycle, hands on the grips, feeling 3 months of work and healing vibrate beneath him. The restoration was complete. New gaskets, synchronized carburetors, fresh paint on the fuel tank in deep British racing green, chrome polished until it caught sunlight like a mirror. Lena stood in the garage doorway, coffee cup in hand, watching him with a smile that made his chest tight. How does it feel? She called over the engine noise. Ryan twisted the throttle, listened to the response, then killed the ignition. The sudden silence felt profound. Like freedom. Like I actually finished something for myself instead of abandoning it halfway through. You did finish it. I'm so proud of you. He climbed off the bike, pulled off his gloves, and crossed to where she stood. We finished it, You handed me tools for 3 months, listened to me complain about stripped bolts, helped me figure out the wiring harness when I was ready to give up. This wasn't solo. Maybe not. Lena set down her coffee, wrapped her arms around his waist. But you did the hard work. I just showed up. Showing up is the hard work. Ryan kissed the top of her head, breathing in her shampoo and the garage smell of motor oil that had somehow become home. Speaking of which, I have a question. Dangerous opening. Remember that road trip I talked about? The one from my unfinished novel, Riding Cross Country with No Destination? I remember. I want to take it. Not cross country, not yet, but a week. Just me and the bike and some highways I've never seen. Clear my head before I start at Marlow in January. He pulled back to see her face. Will you be okay with that? Lena's expression flickered, something that looked like fear before she schooled it into support. Of course. You should go. When? Next week if the weather holds. I know it's last minute and I know we have plans. Ryan. She put her hand on his chest right over his heart. Go. Take your trip. I'll be here when you get back. But her voice was tight, and Ryan knew her well enough now to hear what she wasn't saying. You're scared I won't come back. That's ridiculous. Is it? He took her hand, led her to the bench against the garage wall, and sat, pulling her down beside him. Talk to me. Real talk, not the brave face. Lena was quiet for a long moment, staring at the Triumph like it held answers. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. My grandfather took a trip once. Said he needed to clear his head after a difficult quarter. He was gone for 3 weeks, and when he came back, he was different, distant. Like the space away had shown him he didn't actually need us, need me, as much as he thought. I'm not your grandfather. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. She pressed her palms against her thighs, a gesture Ryan recognized as anxiety. But there's this voice in my head that says, if you get away from me, if you experience freedom without my chaos and baggage, you'll realize you're better off alone. Ryan's heart broke a little. Lena, you're not chaos and baggage. You're the person I want to come home to. You say that now. I say that always. He turned her to face him, hands on her shoulders, making her meet his eyes. Do you trust me? Yes? Then trust this. I'm taking a week to ride and think and be alone with myself because I need to prove I can be okay independently before I tie my professional life back to yours. That's healthy. That's me doing the work. He softened his voice. But I'm coming back. To you, to us, to the life we're building. That's not negotiable. Lena's eyes were bright. Promise? I promise. And to prove it, Ryan pulled out his phone, opened his calendar. Let's plan something for when I get back. Something concrete you can look forward to instead of spiraling about abandonment. Like what? That long weekend you mentioned. Pick a place you've always wanted to visit but never had time for. We'll go together the day after I get back from the bike trip. No work, no phones, just us. Lena considered this, and Ryan could see her brain working, trying to find the flaw in the plan or the way it could go wrong. Then she seemed to consciously let it go, choosing trust over fear. There's a small town in Vermont, Stowe. They have an architecture walking tour I've wanted to do for years. Perfect. Book it. Make reservations, plan the whole thing, give yourself something to control while I'm gone. He smiled. I'll do the spontaneous motorcycle trip, you do the meticulously planned romantic weekend. We each play to our strengths. She laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. That's actually a good idea. I have them occasionally. Occasionally. But she was smiling, and when she kissed him, it tasted like trust and coffee and the future they were choosing together. Ryan left for his trip the following Tuesday. The Triumph loaded with a small pack of essentials and a route that was more suggestion than plan. He decided to head south through the mountains, follow back roads and small highways, stay in cheap motels and eat at diners, live the cliché he'd been dreaming about for years. The first day was pure joy, cold air rushing past, the Triumph humming beneath him, landscape unfolding like a gift. He stopped at a roadside overlook and called Lena. How's it going? She answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. It's perfect. The bike's running great, the weather held, and I just saw a sunset that would make you want to design a building around it. Send me a picture. He did, and she responded with a photo of her dinner, takeout Thai from their favorite place, eaten alone at her massive dining table. The image made his chest ache in a good way. I miss you, he admitted. I miss you too, but I'm glad you're doing this. They talked for 20 minutes, easy conversation about nothing important, before Ryan had to go. The light was fading and he wanted to reach his motel before dark. But knowing she was there, that he could call her and she'd answer, made the solitude feel chosen instead of lonely. The second day was harder. Ryan hit rain around noon, the kind of cold November downpour that made riding miserable. He pushed through for an hour before admitting defeat and pulling into a small town library to wait it out. Inside, surrounded by books and quiet, he opened his laptop and stared at the blank document he'd been avoiding for weeks. The novel. The one he'd started and abandoned. The story about freedom and roads and finding yourself in motion. He told Lena he was scared to be bad at it, and she'd said to be bad at it anyway. So he started typing, expecting nothing, and 3 hours later had 2,000 words of terrible, beautiful, honest prose about a man running from himself while pretending to run toward something. When he emerged from the library, the rain had stopped and the world smelled clean. Ryan felt lighter, like he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. He texted Lena a photo of his laptop screen showing the word count. Her response came immediately. You're writing. How does it feel? Terrifying and right. Like this. Like us. Exactly like us. The third day, Ryan rode through mountains that took his breath away and stopped at a diner where the coffee was terrible and the pie was transcendent. He sat in a booth by the window, working on his novel, occasionally looking up to watch the world pass by. An older waitress refilled his coffee and gestured at his laptop. Writing the great American novel? She asked with a smile. Just a small one, about motorcycles and freedom. Best kind. My husband used to ride, said it was the only place his brain ever shut up. She topped off his cup. He's been gone 5 years now. I miss watching him come home from trips, all windburned and happy and full of stories. Ryan thought about Lena waiting at home, probably checking her phone too often and trying not to spiral. I'm heading back soon. Someone's waiting. Good. The trip matters, but coming home matters more. That night, in a motel room that smelled like old carpet and industrial cleaner, Ryan called Lena. How are you really? He asked, skipping pleasantries. A pause, then honesty. Struggling, I'm trying not to be, trying to give you space and trust the process, but I keep having these moments where I'm convinced you're not coming back. What do you do when you have those moments? I call my therapist, journal about it. Sometimes I go to this garage and sit with your tools and remind myself that you left them here because you're coming back. Her laugh was self-deprecating. It's pathetic. It's not pathetic. It's healing. Ryan lay back on the uncomfortable motel bed, phone pressed to his ear. You're learning to sit with uncertainty instead of controlling it. That's huge. It feels terrible. Most growth does. He smiled at the water-stained ceiling. For what it's worth, I think about you constantly. Every beautiful view, every good meal, every word I write. My first thought is wanting to share it with you. You're not something I'm running from, Lena. You're what I'm learning to run toward. He heard her breath catch. Ryan, I know it's only been 3 days. I know a week apart shouldn't be this hard, but I need you to understand something. He chose his words carefully, wanting to get this right. Taking space doesn't mean needing less. It means building enough self to bring something whole to us. Does that make sense? Yes. Her voice was thick. When do you come home? 2 more days, then I'm all yours for a long weekend in Vermont. I booked the cutest bed and breakfast. It's probably too romantic and definitely too expensive, but I don't care. Perfect. Send me the details? She did, and they spent another hour on the phone while Ryan looked at photos of the place she'd chosen, a restored farmhouse with mountain views and a hot tub and breakfast served by fireplace. It was exactly the kind of place Lena would pick, carefully researched and perfectly appointed, and Ryan loved that she was pouring her need for control into planning something for them instead of trying to control him. The 4th day brought mechanical trouble. The Triumph's clutch started slipping around noon, and Ryan limped into a small town with one motorcycle shop run by a grizzled mechanic who looked like he'd been fixing bikes since before Ryan was born. "Clutch cable's stretching," the mechanic said after a quick look. "I can adjust it, but you'll need a replacement soon. Can you do it now?" "Parts won't be here until tomorrow morning. You're welcome to wait in town, or I can ship it to wherever you're headed." Ryan considered. He could push on, end the trip early, get home to Lena tonight instead of Friday. But that felt like running, cutting the trip short because being alone got uncomfortable, because he missed her too much, because independence was harder than partnership. "I'll wait," he decided. "Adjust what you can today. Replace the cable tomorrow." The mechanic nodded approval. "Good choice. Bike like this, you don't rush." Ryan spent the afternoon exploring the small town. Population maybe 3,000, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers got curious looks. He found another diner, wrote another 2,000 words, and felt the story taking shape in ways that surprised him. The protagonist wasn't running from anything specific anymore. He was running toward himself, toward the person he'd been before obligations and expectations had buried him. It felt autobiographical in ways that were uncomfortable and necessary. That evening, Ryan video called Lena instead of just phoning. When her face appeared on screen, he felt his heart kick. "You look tired," he observed. "Brutal day. The tri-state integration is hitting snags and everyone wanted my input." She was clearly in her home office, laptop open beside her, still in work clothes at 8 p.m. "I know I'm supposed to be delegating more, but crisis management is hard to hand off." "Did you eat dinner?" She glanced away, guilty. "I had coffee." "Lena." I know. I'll order something after we hang up." "Order it now, I'll wait." She sighed, but picked up her phone, ordered Thai delivery, then returned to the video call. "Happy?" "Getting there. Talk to me about the integration issues." They spent an hour discussing work, and Ryan found himself analyzing the problems with fresh perspective. Distance had given him clarity. He could see where Lena was micromanaging, where her team was capable but not trusted, where her need for control was creating bottlenecks instead of solving them. "You need to let go," he said gently. "Not because you can't handle it, but because handling everything yourself is unsustainable." "I know that intellectually." "Then know it practically. Tomorrow, identify 3 decisions you'd normally make and let someone else make them. Don't oversee, don't double check, just trust." Lena looked skeptical. "What if they make the wrong choice?" "Then they learn from it, and the company doesn't collapse, and you get to practice believing that your value isn't just in being indispensable." She was quiet, processing. Then, "You're going to be very annoying when you start as director of wellness, aren't you?" Ryan grinned. "Absolutely. I'm going to challenge every policy that prioritizes productivity over people, starting with late-night emails and working dinners. I'm going to hate it." "No, you're not. You're going to be relieved someone finally gave you permission to build something different." He softened his voice. "That's why you created this position, remember? Not to keep me close, but to change the culture that almost destroyed me." "Both things can be true." "They are both true. And I'm coming home ready to do the work." Lena smiled, and it reached her eyes. "I'm counting on it. How's the trip otherwise?" He told her about the clutch cable, the small town, the writing he'd been doing. She told him about booking their Vermont weekend, the architecture tour she'd planned, the breakfast place near the bed and breakfast that supposedly had the best coffee in New England. "You've researched everything, haven't you?" Ryan asked, amused. "Of course. I don't do spontaneous well, remember? I love that about you. I love that you're planning the perfect weekend while I'm wandering aimlessly. We balance each other." "We do." She paused, then asked quietly, "Are you glad you went? On this trip?" "Yes. Not because I needed to get away from you, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could be alone and okay, that I have an identity outside of work and outside of us." He held her gaze through the screen. "But Lena, being alone and okay just makes me more certain about wanting to come home to you. The space isn't creating distance, it's creating clarity." Her eyes filled and she blinked rapidly. "I needed to hear that." "I know, that's why I said it." They stayed on the video call until her food arrived, talking about nothing and everything, comfortable in the silence when conversation lapsed. Finally, Lena yawned and Ryan laughed. Go to bed. Eat your dinner and sleep and let the integration crisis wait until morning. Yes, boss. Not your boss. Your partner, reminding you that you're human. I like the sound of that. Partner. Me too. See you Friday? See you Friday. Ryan hung up and sat in his motel room feeling more connected to Lena than he had sitting beside her on her couch. The distance was teaching them both something essential, that love didn't require constant proximity, that trust could survive space, that missing someone was different from needing them to be whole. The fifth day, the Triumph was ready by 10 a.m. The new clutch cable installed and tested. Ryan paid the mechanic, thanked him for the work, and headed north toward home. He could have pushed straight through, made it back by evening, but instead he took his time. Stopped at overlooks, took photos, wrote in coffee shops, savored the last day of solitude. Around 4 p.m., his phone rang. Not Lena, his mother, a rare call that made him nervous. Hi, Mom. Ryan, honey, I've been trying to reach you all week. Your father and I were worried. Guilt stabbed through him. In all his focus on Lena and the trip and his own healing, he'd barely talked to his parents. I'm sorry, I've been on a motorcycle trip, getting some space. Space from what? Did something happen at work? He'd never told them about the resignation, the burnout, any of it. They still thought he was working at Marlowe Manufacturing, grinding towards success they'd understand. The truth felt like admitting failure. I left my job, he said, 2 months ago. I was burning out and I needed to leave. Silence. Then his mother's careful voice, the one she used when she was trying not to judge. You quit? Without another position lined up? I had to, for my health. Ryan, that's... She stopped, regrouped. That's concerning. How are you paying rent? What's your plan? I'm starting a new job in January, Director of Employee Wellness at Marlowe Manufacturing. Better position, better pay, better for my mental health. So you're going back to the same company that burned you out? It was a fair question, one he'd asked himself. It's different now, I'm different, and I'm going back to change the culture that almost broke me. His mother sighed. I don't understand any of this. You've always been so responsible, so focused. This doesn't sound like you. Maybe that's the problem. Ryan kept his voice gentle. Maybe the me, you know, was performing responsibility instead of actually taking care of myself. This is me learning the difference. And the motorcycle trip? Part of the learning. Proving I can be alone and okay. Another pause. Are you seeing someone? A therapist? I'm writing again, the novel I started in college. And I'm in a relationship with someone who's teaching me what healthy support looks like. A relationship? Ryan, you just got out of one. That ended 8 months ago, Mom. This is different. She's different. He found himself smiling just talking about Lena. She's brilliant and driven and learning to be human alongside me. We're good for each other. His mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. You sound happy. Different, but happy. I am. For the first time in years, I actually am. Then I guess I'm happy for you, even if I don't completely understand. They talked for another 20 minutes, Ryan explaining his plans, his mother gradually warming to the idea that maybe her son's unconventional choices were actually working. When they hung up, Ryan felt lighter, like he'd set down another weight he hadn't realized he was carrying, the weight of his parents' expectations, their vision of success that had never quite fit. He made it home to his apartment by 7 p.m., the Triumph purring into his parking space like it belonged there. His place looked the same, small and slightly messy and completely his, but he felt different entering it, stronger, clearer, more himself than he'd been in years. Lena texted before he could even get his helmet off. You're home. Can I come over? Or is that too eager? Ryan smiled, typed back. Come over. Bring wine. I missed you. She arrived 30 minutes later with a bottle of red and a smile that made his heart stutter. They stood in his doorway for a moment, just looking at each other, before Ryan pulled her inside and kissed her properly. She tasted like hope and coming home and everything he'd been riding toward. How was it? Lena asked when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Perfect. Lonely? Necessary? All of the above. He led her to the couch, poured wine, and spent the next 2 hours telling her about the trip, the roads and the writing and the small towns and the mechanical trouble. She listened with complete attention, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, looking at him like he'd done something brave instead of just taken a week on a motorcycle. "Did you figure out what you needed to figure out?" she asked finally. "Yeah. I figured out that I can be alone without disappearing, that my identity exists outside of work and outside of us, and that's actually what makes me better at both." He took her hand. "I also figured out that independence isn't the opposite of partnership. It's the foundation of it." "I'm still learning that." Lena squeezed his hand. "This week was hard. I wanted to call you 100 times. Wanted to track you down and make sure you were okay. Wanted to control your safety, since I couldn't control your choice. But I didn't. I know, I'm proud of you. My therapist is proud of me too. She said sitting with uncertainty is advanced level work." Lena smiled. "We're both doing advanced level work, apparently." "We are. And tomorrow we get to do the fun part. Vermont, architecture tours, that bed and breakfast you researched within an inch of its life. You're still up for it? You just got back from a trip. This is different. That was solo healing. This is us celebrating that we survived distance and came back stronger." Ryan pulled her closer until she was tucked against his side. "I want Vermont. Want to see you geek out over old buildings and drink overpriced coffee and wake up next to you in a place that isn't haunted by work stress." "When you put it that way." She tilted her face up, kissed him softly. "Thank you for coming home." "Thank you for being home to come back too." They left for Vermont early Saturday morning, Lena driving her BMW because Ryan's entire body was sore from 5 days on the motorcycle. The drive took 4 hours through mountains dressed in late autumn browns and grays, the landscape beautiful in its starkness. They talked the whole way, easy conversation punctuated by comfortable silence, the kind of rhythm that only came from genuinely knowing someone. The bed and breakfast was exactly as advertised. A restored 1890s farmhouse with exposed beams and a fireplace big enough to stand in and views that made Lena actually gasp when they walked into their room. "This is perfect," Ryan said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out at the mountains. "I might have over-prepared." "You definitely over-prepared. It's one of my favorite things about you." They spent the weekend exploring Stowe, walking the architecture tour while Lena explained design principles and historical context with the kind of passion Ryan recognized from her rare moments talking about buildings instead of manufacturing. She lit up discussing load-bearing walls and roof lines and the way old churches use light to create reverence, and Ryan fell a little more in love with her seeing this version, the woman she might have been if inheritance hadn't determined her path. "Do you regret it?" he asked Sunday morning over breakfast at the place she'd researched. "Not becoming an architect?" Lena considered the question seriously, fork paused over perfectly cooked eggs. "I regret not having the choice, but I don't know if I regret the outcome. I'm good at running Marlowe Manufacturing. I've built something meaningful, employed thousands of people, carried on my grandfather's legacy with innovation he never could have imagined." She met his eyes. "But yeah, sometimes I wonder what I would have designed if given the chance." "It's not too late. You could take classes, do it as a hobby." "Maybe." She smiled. "Add it to the list of things I'm learning to make space for, right after therapy, delegating at work, and actually having a life outside the office." Ambitious list. "I'm an ambitious person. I'm just learning to aim that ambition at being human instead of just being successful." They drove home Sunday evening, both quieter, holding hands across the center console. The weekend had been exactly what they needed, space away from normal life to just exist as a couple without the weight of work or expectations or anything except being together. As they pulled into the city limits, Lena squeezed his hand. "2 more weeks until you start at Marlowe," she said. 2 weeks? You ready for me to turn your company culture upside down?" Terrified and excited in equal measure, she glanced at him. "Promise me something? Anything." When you're creating programs and challenging policies and doing the work I hired you for, don't hold back because of us. Don't soften your recommendations or avoid conflict because you're worried about our relationship." That's going to make things complicated. I know, but it's necessary. I need you to be the director of wellness who fights for my employees, even when that puts you at odds with me as CEO. Her voice was firm. We'll figure out how to navigate the conflicts as they come, but the work matters more than our comfort. Ryan lifted her hand, kissed her knuckles. You're kind of amazing, you know that? I'm learning. We both are. And they were. Learning to love each other and themselves, learning to build something that honored both their partnership and their independence. Learning that healing wasn't linear or simple, but absolutely worth the work. 2 weeks later, Ryan walked into Marlowe Manufacturing as Director of Employee Wellness, ready to fight for the humanity of every person who worked there. Ready to challenge the woman he loved to build something better. Ready to prove that transformation was possible when you were brave enough to choose it. Ryan's first day back at Marlowe Manufacturing started with resistance he should have anticipated but somehow hadn't fully prepared for. He arrived at 7 a.m., earlier than necessary, carrying a messenger bag full of research and proposals and the nervous energy of someone about to challenge an entire corporate culture. His new office was on the 3rd floor, far from Lena's executive suite, a deliberate separation they'd agreed on to maintain boundaries. The space was small but had a window, and someone, probably Lena, had left a potted plant on the desk with a note that read, "Make them uncomfortable. That's the job." L. Ryan smiled, tucked the note in his drawer, and spent the first hour reviewing employee data he'd requested weeks ago. Turnover rates, sick day usage, exit interview summaries, anonymous survey results about workplace satisfaction. The numbers painted a picture he'd lived but hadn't fully grasped from the inside. Marlowe Manufacturing was systematically burning through talented people, losing institutional knowledge and innovation to exhaustion masquerading as dedication. At 9 a.m., he had his first meeting with the executive team. Lena, the COO, CFO, head of HR, and the division vice presidents. Ryan had prepared a 30-minute presentation outlining his initial assessment and proposed interventions. He'd shown it to Lena the night before, and she'd been blunt. They're going to hate this, she'd said, reading through his recommendations. Mandatory time off, hard stops on email after 7 p.m., restructured performance metrics that don't reward overwork. You're attacking everything they believe makes this company successful. I know. Good. Don't back down. Now, sitting in the conference room where he'd once presented merger projections while running on 4 hours of sleep, Ryan faced the same executives who'd praised his dedication while it destroyed him. Lena sat at the head of the table, perfectly professional, giving him no special recognition beyond a brief nod of acknowledgement. Ryan started with data. Showed them turnover costs, productivity losses from burnout, the correlation between employee well-being and innovation metrics. Then he hit them with the personal stories pulled from exit interviews, anonymized but devastating, talented employees leaving because they'd missed too many of their kids' bedtimes, because their marriages were failing, because they'd developed stress-related health issues, and the company insurance barely covered therapy. This isn't sustainable, Ryan concluded. We're treating people as renewable resources when they're not, and the cost, financial, ethical, reputational, is becoming untenable. But Talon, the CFO, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, who Ryan had always respected, spoke first. Your proposed interventions would reduce available work hours by approximately 15%. How do we maintain output? We hire more people. We stop expecting 60-hour productivity from 40-hour positions. We build systems that work instead of relying on human burnout to bridge the gap. That's a significant cost increase. Less than our current turnover costs. I have the analysis in your packets. Ryan kept his voice calm, professional, refusing to be defensive. We're spending millions recruiting and training replacements for people we're driving away. Retention is cheaper than replacement. The COO, a man named David, who'd been with the company for 20 years, leaned back in his chair. With all due respect, Ryan, you burned out because the merger pushed you beyond normal capacity. That was an exceptional circumstance, not the daily reality. Was it? Ryan pulled up another slide, this one showing aggregate hours worked across departments over the past 2 years. These numbers suggest otherwise. The merger was extreme, yes, but the culture that created my burnout exists company-wide. We reward people who sacrifice everything, and we're surprised when they have nothing left. We reward people who deliver results, David countered. That's how business works. It's how our business currently works. I'm proposing we change that. The tension in the room was palpable. Ryan could feel the resistance, the executives exchanging glances that said this idealistic newcomer didn't understand reality. He glanced at Lena, saw her watching him with an unreadable expression, and drew strength from knowing she'd told him not to back down. I understand this challenges fundamental assumptions, Ryan continued, but I'm asking you to consider the possibility that we've normalized dysfunction, that the way we've always done things is actually breaking people, and we have the power and the resources to do better. Lena spoke for the first time, her voice carrying that CEO authority that made everyone straighten slightly. Ryan's recommendations align with research across multiple industries. Companies that prioritize employee well-being see measurable improvements in productivity, innovation, and profitability. This isn't charity, it's strategic investment. You're backing this? Patricia asked, surprise evident. I created this position because I recognized we were failing our people. Ryan's job is to show us how to do better, even when it's uncomfortable. Lena met Ryan's eyes briefly, a flash of support, then returned to executive mode. I expect all of you to seriously consider these proposals. We'll reconvene next week with feedback and questions. The meeting ended with polite tension, executives filing out with Ryan's proposals, and various expressions of skepticism. When the room cleared except for him and Lena, she closed the door. That was brutal, she said. I expected brutal. I didn't expect David to be quite so hostile. He's been here 20 years doing things one way. You're telling him that way is wrong. That's threatening. Lena crossed to where he stood by the window. But you held your ground. I'm proud of you. Even though they all hate me now? They don't hate you. They're uncomfortable, which means you're doing exactly what I hired you to do. She smiled. Welcome back to Marlowe Manufacturing. Feels different from this side. It should. You're not here to produce anymore. You're here to protect the people who do. She glanced at the closed door, then quickly squeezed his hand. Dinner tonight? My place? We can debrief properly. Perfect. She left first, maintaining their professional separation, and Ryan spent the rest of the day meeting with HR to review current policies and meeting with employee resource groups to hear firsthand about workplace challenges. By 5 p.m., his brain was full and his determination was ironclad. The resistance didn't matter. The discomfort didn't matter. This work was essential, and he was uniquely positioned to do it because he'd survived what he was trying to prevent. That evening at Lena's house, Ryan collapsed on her couch with the exhaustion of someone who'd spent 8 hours fighting cultural inertia. How do you do this every day? He asked as she handed him a glass of wine. Push against resistance, defend decisions, lead people who don't want to be led in new directions? Practice. And the bone-deep certainty that I'm right, even when I'm not sure. She sat beside him, tucking her legs under her. Today was your first battle. How do you feel? Like I might actually be able to do this. Like the work matters enough to fight for. He took a sip of wine. Also like I'm going to make a lot of people angry. Good. Comfortable people don't change. Angry people might. Lena studied him. You know what impressed me most about your presentation? What? You didn't soften anything for me. You presented the same brutal assessment you'd give any CEO, including the implicit criticism of my leadership for allowing this culture to develop. That took guts. You told me not to hold back. I did. But there's a difference between intellectually agreeing to be challenged and actually sitting in a room while your boyfriend tells your executive team that your company is breaking people. She smiled. I didn't love it, but I respected it. Ryan set down his wine, turned to face her fully. Can we do this? Actually maintain the separation between professional and personal? Because today was easy compared to what's coming. When I start implementing changes and people push back and some of that pushback goes through you, we'll handle it. Lena's voice was firm. We knew this would be complicated. We chose it anyway because the work matters more than our comfort. That hasn't changed. What if I recommend something you fundamentally disagree with? Then we'll argue about it professionally at work, and we'll process it personally at home. We'll keep the context separate. She took his hand. Ryan, I trust you to do this job with integrity. That means sometimes you'll make recommendations I don't like. That's not a relationship problem. That's you doing exactly what I need you to do. He believed her mostly, but he also knew that theory and practice were different animals, and they were about to test whether their relationship could survive professional conflict. Over the next 3 months, Ryan implemented changes systematically and met resistance at every turn. He instituted a policy requiring managers to justify any meeting scheduled before 8 a.m. or after 6 p.m., and productivity-obsessed executives complained that he was micromanaging their schedules. He created mandatory mental health days that didn't count against sick leave, and the CFO argued it was fiscally irresponsible. He restructured performance reviews to remove metrics that rewarded overwork, and half the senior managers protested that he was coddling employees. Through it all, Lena backed him publicly, while privately admitting the changes made her deeply uncomfortable. I spent my entire career believing that extraordinary results required extraordinary sacrifice, she told him one night in late March, 3 months into his tenure. You're asking me to believe that's wrong, that we can achieve the same results while treating people humanely. That's a fundamental identity shift. I know. I'm asking you to trust data over instinct. I'm trying. But every time someone misses a deadline because they actually used their mental health day, my first instinct is to see it as a failure of your system rather than a success. Ryan understood. He was fighting muscle memory built over decades, corporate culture so entrenched it felt like gravity. But the data was starting to shift in his favor. Turnover had dropped 12% in his first quarter. Sick day usage had decreased. Counterintuitively, employees were healthier when allowed to actually rest. Anonymous satisfaction surveys showed measurable improvements in morale, work-life balance, and feeling valued by the company. The breakthrough came in April during a particularly contentious board meeting that Ryan wasn't supposed to know about, but Lena told him about anyway because they'd promised each other honesty. Richard Moss asked if your position was really necessary or if I'd created it as some kind of vanity project, Lena said that evening, anger barely contained beneath her professional veneer. He implied that the changes you're implementing are hurting productivity and that we should cut our losses. What did you say? I showed him the retention data, the productivity metrics that prove we're actually getting more done with fewer people burning out, the client satisfaction scores that have improved because our employees aren't exhausted. She paced her living room, energy coiled tight. Then I told him that if he wanted to question my strategic decisions, he could do it openly instead of hiding behind concern about a single position. Lena, I'm not finished. She whirled to face him. I also told him that Ryan Cole is the best hire I've made in 5 years, that the cultural transformation he's leading will define Marlowe Manufacturing's competitive advantage for the next decade, and that if the board didn't like it, they could find a new CEO. Ryan's chest tightened. You didn't. I did. And you want to know the terrifying part? I meant it. She crossed to him, took his hands. I realized sitting in that boardroom that I'd rather walk away from this company than go back to the way things were. That your work matters more than my ego or the board's comfort or any of it. That's huge. It's terrifying. I've built my entire identity around being CEO of Marlowe Manufacturing. Realizing I'm willing to risk that for principle feels like free-falling. She smiled, but it was shaky. You've completely destroyed my priorities, and I'm not sure whether to thank you or blame you. Thank me. Definitely thank me. Ryan pulled her close, felt her trembling slightly against him. You're not losing your identity. You're expanding it, making space for the person you are outside of the title. I don't know who that person is yet. Then we'll figure it out together. The board ultimately backed Lena's position, swayed by data and her willingness to stake her reputation on Ryan's work. But the incident crystallized something important. Their professional and personal lives were more intertwined than they'd intended, and pretending otherwise was becoming impossible. We need to talk about boundaries, Ryan said over dinner the following week. Real ones, not theoretical ones. Lena set down her fork, that focused attention he recognized from board meetings. Okay, I can't keep coming home and processing work conflicts with you. When executives push back on my recommendations and that pushback goes through you, discussing it here blurs lines in ways that aren't healthy for either of us. So what do? We get better at separating contexts. Work stays at work unless it's actively affecting our relationship. We don't debrief every meeting or strategize every implementation. We trust each other to handle our professional responsibilities independently. He met her eyes. And we make space for this, for us, to be about more than Marlowe Manufacturing. Lena was quiet for a long moment, processing. That's going to be hard for me. Work is where I feel competent. Talking about it feels safe. I know, but safe isn't always healthy. Ryan softened his voice. You're in therapy to learn how to have an identity outside of CEO. I can't enable avoiding that work by making our relationship another extension of the office. She nodded slowly. You're right. I hate that you're right, but you are. They implemented new boundaries. No work talk after 8 p.m. No strategizing about Ryan's initiatives unless he specifically asked for input, and dedicated date nights that were completely work-free. It was awkward at first, both of them reaching for familiar topics before catching themselves, but gradually they found their rhythm. May brought the motorcycle trip they'd been planning since winter. A week riding through the mountains with Lena following in her car, meeting Ryan at predetermined stops for meals and nights together. It was a compromise between his need for solo road time and her desire to share the experience, and it worked beautifully. Ryan rode through mountain passes with spring flowers just beginning to bloom, stopped at overlooks that took his breath away, and wrote in his journal about freedom that wasn't running from anything anymore, but running toward a life he was actively choosing. Every evening, he'd pull into some small town and find Lena waiting, usually with coffee and a smile, and they'd explore together before finding a motel or bed and breakfast for the night. This is perfect, Lena said one evening in a tiny town in West Virginia, sitting on a motel balcony watching sunset paint the mountains gold. You get your solo time, I get to see places I'd never visit otherwise, and we get to end each day together. Better than Vermont? Different than Vermont, both perfect in their own ways. She leaned against him. I've been thinking about something. Dangerous. Hush. She smiled. I've been with the company for 15 years. Built it from 150 million to over 400 million. Transformed operations, expanded markets, proven everything I needed to prove. Ryan waited, sensing she was building towards something important. What if I didn't stay CEO forever? Lena continued, voice careful like she was testing the words. What if in 5 years, maybe 10, I transitioned to chairman and let someone else run daily operations? I could focus on strategy, work on selective projects, maybe even take that architecture class you suggested. You'd give up being CEO? Not give up. Evolve. There's a difference. She turned to look at him. I don't want to be 70 years old and realize I spent my entire life running a company I inherited instead of building a life I chose. You've shown me what's possible when you're brave enough to step away from what's expected and move toward what's authentic. Ryan's throat tightened. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard you say. It's terrifying, but so was showing up at your door in the rain, and that worked out. She smiled. I'm learning that the terrifying choices are usually the right ones. They spent the rest of the trip talking about futures they'd never dared imagine. Lena gradually transitioning out of CEO responsibilities, Ryan building the wellness program into something that could be replicated at other companies, both of them making space for creativity and rest, and the motorcycle trips that fed Ryan's soul. It wasn't a concrete plan, just possibilities sketched in conversation, but it felt like hope. By the time they returned home in late May, something fundamental had shifted. They'd proven that their relationship could survive professional complexity, that distance made them stronger instead of weaker, that building individual identities enhanced rather than threatened their partnership. June brought Ryan's 6-month review at Marlowe Manufacturing, conducted by the COO to maintain separation from Lena. The results were compelling: turnover down 23%, productivity up 8%, employee satisfaction scores at a 5-year high. The wellness programs Ryan had implemented were working, and even the skeptical executives were starting to acknowledge that maybe treating people humanely was actually good business. The board wants to expand your budget, David told Ryan during the review. They're seeing the ROI and want to accelerate implementation across all divisions. That's great, but I want to make sure we're not just throwing money at the problem. Culture change takes time. Understood, but they're bought in now. You've proven the concept. David smiled, something that looked almost like respect. I owe you an apology. I was resistant to your ideas because they challenged everything I believed about what makes companies successful. But you were right. We were breaking people, and you're showing us how to do better. The apology meant more than Ryan expected. He'd spent 6 months fighting resistance, and having one of his biggest skeptics acknowledge the value of the work felt like validation he hadn't realized he needed. That night, Ryan took Lena to the diner where they'd had their first official date, the place with terrible coffee and excellent pie, and memories of choosing to try something terrifying together. We should celebrate, Lena said, sliding into their usual booth. 6 months of transforming company culture deserves recognition. We should celebrate more than that. Ryan reached across the table, took her hand. We've been together for 8 months, survived me quitting, coming back, implementing changes that made both of us uncomfortable, maintaining boundaries while building something real. That's worth celebrating too. It is. Lena squeezed his hand. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to get too complicated or too hard or too messy. And it's definitely complicated and hard and messy. But it's also the best thing in my life. She smiled. You're the best thing in my life. Ryan felt his heart expand. You're the best thing in mine, though the motorcycle is a close second. I'll accept second place to a vintage Triumph. She paused, then said carefully, I've been thinking about moving. Moving where? Not far, but my house feels like a museum to my grandfather's legacy. I want something that's mine, smaller, cozier, with a better garage for your bike and maybe space for an architecture studio. She met his eyes. And eventually, if things keep going the way they're going, maybe space for you. Ryan's breath caught. You want me to move in? Not tomorrow, but someday, when we're ready, yes. I want to build a life with you that's about our choices instead of inherited obligations. She looked nervous, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. Is that too much too fast? No, it's perfect. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. It's absolutely perfect. They spent the rest of dinner planning hypothetical futures, the house Lena might buy, the architecture classes she might take, the road trips they'd take on the Triumph once Ryan felt confident enough to bring a passenger, the novel he was still writing that might actually get finished now that he'd stopped sabotaging himself with overwork. It was all possibility and hope, nothing concrete, but it felt like building something solid anyway. Summer settled over the city, and Ryan found his rhythm at Marlowe Manufacturing. The work was challenging but sustainable, pushing against cultural inertia while seeing measurable change. He'd built a team of 3 people reporting to him, all passionate about employee well-being, and together they were creating programs that were actually making a difference. Lena, true to her commitment, was delegating more. She'd promoted 2 vice presidents to handle day-to-day operations she used to micromanage, carved out time for the architecture class she'd enrolled in, and was actively working with succession planning to identify potential future CEOs. The transformation was gradual but real, and Ryan watched her slowly become more human and less machine. In August, they took another motorcycle trip, this one longer, 2 weeks through the Southwest, covering over 3,000 miles. Lena rode behind him for part of it, her arms wrapped around his waist, both of them learning to trust each other and the machine carrying them through desert landscapes that felt like another planet. I get it now, Lena shouted over the engine noise as they cruised through New Mexico, red rocks rising on either side. Why you love this? Yeah? It's the only time my brain shuts up completely. I'm not planning or analyzing or controlling. I'm just here. Ryan smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. The road had taught him that presence was its own form of freedom, that you didn't need a destination to find meaning in the journey. They stopped in a small town that night, found a motel with a pool that had seen better decades, and swam under stars so bright they looked fake. Lena floated on her back, hair spreading around her like ink, and said something that made Ryan's heart stop. I love you. I don't think I've said that explicitly, but I do. I love you in ways that terrify me, and ways that make me feel more human than I've felt in years. Ryan swam to her, took her hands, kept them both floating. I love you too. Have loved you for longer than I admitted, even to myself. What do we do with that? We keep choosing it. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. We keep choosing each other and ourselves and the life we're building together. He pulled her close, treading water for both of them. We keep being brave enough to want something real instead of something perfect. Lena kissed him, tasting like chlorine and hope, and whispered against his lips, I choose this. I choose us. They made love that night in a motel room that smelled like desert and dust, and it felt like sealing a promise they'd been building toward since the night she showed up on his doorstep in the rain. Not a promise of perfection or ease, but a promise of showing up, being honest, doing the work of loving each other and themselves in equal measure. September brought Lena's 42nd birthday, and Ryan planned a surprise that required calling in favors and careful coordination. He contacted her therapist, her assistant, and her closest board member to clear her schedule for a long weekend, then drove her to a small town 4 hours north where a renowned architect was teaching a weekend intensive workshop. What is this? Lena asked as they pulled up to the community college hosting the class. Your birthday present. 3 days learning architecture from someone whose work you've admired for years. No phones, no work. Just you exploring the thing you gave up for inheritance. Her eyes filled with tears. Ryan, you've spent your whole life being what everyone else needed. This weekend, be what you need. I'll be here when you're done. Lena threw herself at him, kissing him hard enough to bruise, then pulled back with a smile that transformed her entire face. Thank you. For seeing me. For this. For everything. Ryan spent the weekend writing in coffee shops while Lena discovered that architectural passion didn't die just because you suppressed it for decades. She came back each evening exhausted and exhilarated, showing him sketches and talking about design principles with the kind of joy he usually only saw when she forgot to be CEO. I'm actually good at this, she said Sunday night, almost surprised. Not just competent, but good. Creative and innovative, and of course you are. You're brilliant at everything you actually care about. I forgot I could care about things outside of Marlowe Manufacturing. She looked at her sketches, then at Ryan. I'm going to keep taking classes, not to become an architect professionally, but just to have something that's mine. Is that okay? It's more than okay. It's essential. October marked 1 year since Ryan had quit Marlowe Manufacturing, 1 year since the burnout that had forced him to choose himself over productivity. He was standing in his office, still small but now decorated with employee thank you notes and photos from wellness events, when Lena appeared in his doorway. Do you have a minute? She asked, professional even though they'd woken up in her bed that morning. For you, always. She closed the door, dropped the professional mask, and smiled. I bought a house. You what? Bought a house. Made an offer last week, closed yesterday, didn't tell you because I wanted it to be a surprise. She pulled up photos on her phone. It's smaller than my current place, has a 2-car garage perfect for the Triumph and whatever project you decide to take on next, and there's a sunroom that would make a perfect architecture studio. Ryan looked through the photos. A craftsman bungalow with original hardwood and built-in bookshelves and windows that seemed to invite light. It was beautiful and human-scaled and absolutely nothing like the Victorian mansion she'd inherited. It's perfect, he said honestly. Move in with me. Lena said it simply, no preamble. I know we talked about someday, but I don't want to wait for someday. I want to wake up with you every morning and come home to you every night and build a life in a space we chose together. Ryan's throat tightened. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. You've taught me that choosing what you want instead of what's expected isn't selfish, it's survival. I want this. I want us. I want to stop living in separate places and start building a home together. He kissed her then, in his office in the middle of the workday, breaking their professional boundaries because some moments were more important than protocol. When they broke apart, both smiling, he said, yes, absolutely yes. They moved in together in November, combining his second-hand furniture with her expensive pieces and creating something eclectic and comfortable in theirs. Ryan set up a writing desk in the sunroom alongside the drafting table Lena had bought for her architecture work, and they spent evenings working in parallel, him on his novel, her on design projects, comfortable in shared silence. December brought the company holiday party, The first one Ryan attended as both Director of Wellness and Lena's partner. They'd been careful about public displays at work, maintaining professional distance. But the party felt different, festive and social enough that boundaries could relax slightly. Ryan was talking with some of his wellness team when David approached, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Can I have a word?" the COO asked. They stepped aside and David said, "I want to thank you for everything you've done this year. The cultural transformation, the programs, the way you've pushed all of us to think differently about how we treat people. Just doing my job. It's more than that. You could have implemented surface-level changes and called it success. Instead, you fought for fundamental transformation even when it made you unpopular." David smiled. "The company is better because of you. We're all better because of you." The acknowledgement hit harder than Ryan expected. "Thank you. That means a lot." "There's something else." David glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Lena told the board she wants to transition out of CEO within 5 years. She's proposing a gradual succession plan where she moves to chairman and focuses on strategic oversight." Ryan kept his expression neutral even though his heart was pounding. "I didn't know she'd formalize that." "She presented it last week. The board is supportive. She's built this company into something remarkable. And the fact that she's planning succession instead of clinging to power is actually increasing confidence in long-term stability." David met Ryan's eyes. "I wanted you to know, because it's clear you're part of why she feels capable of making that choice. You've given her permission to be more than just CEO." "She's given herself that permission. I just supported the decision. However it happened, it's good for her and good for the company. So thank you for that too." As David walked away, Ryan felt a wave of emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride in Lena for choosing herself, gratitude that their relationship had created space for both of them to transform, hope for futures they were actively building instead of passively inheriting. He found Lena across the room, laughing with a group of employees looking younger and lighter than he'd ever seen her at a company function. She caught his eye and smiled, that private smile that was just for him, and mouthed, "I love you." Ryan mouthed it back, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. The year ended with them back at that diner on 5th Street, the place where they'd had their first real date, eating pancakes and terrible coffee and talking about the year that had transformed both their lives. "Do you regret it?" Lena asked. "Quitting? Coming back? Any of it?" "Not for a second. You?" "I regret that it took almost losing you to wake me up. But the outcome? No regrets at all." She reached across the table, took his hand. "You saved my life, you know. Not just by creating wellness programs, but by showing me that I could be more than what I'd inherited. That wanting something different wasn't betrayal. You saved mine too. By showing up in the rain when you could have just let me go, by fighting for us when it would have been easier to maintain professional distance." Ryan squeezed her hand. "We saved each other." "I like that better. Mutual salvation." They finished breakfast and walked out into January cold, a new year stretching ahead full of possibility. Ryan's novel was nearly finished, Lena's architecture portfolio was growing, the wellness programs at Marlowe Manufacturing were being studied by other companies as a model for cultural transformation. They were building lives that honored both their partnership and their individual dreams, proving that love didn't require sacrifice when both people were committed to growth. "Where to next?" Lena asked as they stood on the sidewalk, breath fogging in cold air. "Home," Ryan said. "Our home." "I like the sound of that." They drove back to the craftsman bungalow they'd made theirs, walked through the door hand in hand, and settled into the life they'd been brave enough to choose. The Triumph sat in the garage, ready for spring rides. The sunroom held their creative work, evidence of dreams they were actually pursuing. The bedroom they shared was warm and comfortable, and proof that intimacy could survive complexity when built on honesty. That night, curled together on the couch with a fire crackling and snow beginning to fall outside, Lena said something that felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. "I used to think success meant never needing anyone, being so competent and complete that dependence was weakness." She turned to look at Ryan. "But you've taught me that real strength is being vulnerable enough to need someone and brave enough to let them need you back. That partnership isn't about completion, it's about two whole people choosing to build something together." Ryan kissed her forehead, held her close, and and felt gratitude for every painful step that had brought them here. The burnout that forced him to quit, the rain-soaked confession on his doorstep, the motorcycle trips and therapy sessions, and difficult conversations and boundary setting and all of it. Every hard choice had been worth it. "I love you," he said, "and I'm proud of us. For doing the work, for choosing growth, for building this. I love you too. And I'm proud of the life we're creating, one that honors work without being consumed by it, that makes space for dreams and rest in each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching snow fall through the window, both thinking about futures they were no longer afraid to want. Lena would gradually transition out of CEO, maybe become chairman, definitely keep taking architecture classes and designing buildings that would never be built but mattered anyway. Ryan would continue transforming company culture, finish his novel, take longer motorcycle trips, maybe start teaching other companies how to treat people humanely. But more than any individual achievement, they'd keep choosing each other, keep showing up through the complicated parts and the beautiful parts and the mundane everyday parts that actually made up a life. Keep being brave enough to want something real instead of something perfect. Outside, snow continued falling, blanketing the city in white. Inside, Ryan and Lena sat together in the home they'd chosen, the life they'd built, the love they'd fought for. It wasn't the ending either of them had imagined when she showed up on his doorstep a year ago, drenched and desperate and terrified. It was better. It was real. It was theirs. And that was more than enough.